rock and roll.
I think the girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done. Girls with their nails done.
Kicking this list off at number 100 is an unintentionally comical action thriller starring a retired NFL Hall of Famer who fought fire with fire. Not exactly sure what that means, but it was the tagline of 1998's Firestorm, starring Howie Long as a smoke jumper, as well as Scott Glenn and William Forsythe, as well as a shit ton of digital fire. Now, critically, this isn't the best of films by any means, but I think it's a straightforward action thriller that really sticks to the basics and delivers just enough fun wilderness excitement. Howie Long was given a shot by Hollywood, and he isn't too bad. He's not that great, but he does fit the physicality of this film nicely. The gimmicky action of this smoke jumper using his firefighting skills like chainsaws and axes to fend off a group of criminals on the run is a bit cheesy and it's a bit cliche, but that's also part of the fun, I think, and William Forsythe certainly knew that because he just goes all in on his portrayal of the villain in this film. Firestorm is certainly simple, and most of the fire effects don't hold up so well all these years later, but the stunt work and the practical action does, and the performances aren't too bad for this era of generic action romps. We're going back in time to 1991 for my number 99 pick, but we're going to stick with the retired football player theme, as Brian Bosworth would play an undercover cop who enforced his own brand of justice and who was so slick he would burn you cold. You gotta love taglines from the 80s and 90s. This, of course, is the biker-themed action romp Stone Cold, also starring genre legend Lance Henriksen and William Forsythe once again. Now, Brian the Boz Bosworth was a very good football player for the Seattle Seahawks, but at the time, he was a great personality with his bleached mullet and his edgy attitude. He also looked like a prototypical 80s action star as well, with his hulking vanity muscles, so it was inevitable he would get a shot in Hollywood, and to his credit, I think he made the most of it. Stone Cold is a by-the-numbers undercover action thriller, but Bosworth holds his own as he's kicking ass and dropping one-liners and caring for his pet dragon. William Forsythe shows up again, and Lance Henriksen, to provide the film with a couple of solid villains, and despite the action being a bit generic, there is a ton of it, and it gives the film a steady pace with plenty of excitement to have fun with. Now, I know I said I wasn't really going to include westerns into this list, but despite the theme, my number 98 movie feels more like an action flick than a traditional western, and that would be 1990's Young Guns, where the regulators would reunite for one last ride, led by Emilio Estevez, Christian Slater, Lou Diamond Phillips, and Kiefer Sutherland. Young Guns is filled with a great ensemble cast and tons of personality, led by Emilio Estevez, who is just soaking up every scene in this movie. It's filled with bravado and quotable lines and strong performances, but it's also loaded with a lot of gunfights and other adrenaline-pumping action set pieces that I think make it feel much more like a Western-themed action from 1990 with a total 80s vibe to kind of match the first Young Guns very well. This sequel delivers a memorable score, awesome production design, a great soundtrack, and despite its flashy action, the emotional undercurrent of the film as you make one last ride to the border with the regulators does connect you with these characters, which makes the many hurdles on their mission that much more intense. The tagline for my number 97 movie was "Get on or get out of the way," and it would pair Wesley Snipes and Woody Harrelson as transit cops who decide to take a fortune in 1995's Money Train, also starring a pre-J-Lo Jennifer Lopez and Chris Cooper. Now, Money Train to me kind of feels like a movie that threw a lot of ideas against the wall to kind of see what would stick. You get the charm of Wesley and Woody playing foster brothers, so there's an effective balance of humor between them, and then you get the subway arsonist played by Chris Cooper. Then you get Robert Blake playing this cartoonish villain that doesn't really fit in the film at all. And then you get Jennifer Lopez tossed into the mix. And then you get Woody Harrelson's gambling problems pushing him to steal the money train. So admittedly, it is a busy movie, and Wesley and Woody aren't as strong as they were in White Men Can't Jump, but I don't think it hinders this movie from being a very fun, easily consumable thriller with some laughs and an appealing blend of action and a closing that goes all out on the over-the-top suspense. Now, my number 96 pick could easily be the strangest, if not the certainly the most craziest movie on this list. It would be a movie that would star two guys who would go on to win Oscar awards. It's a virtual reality-themed sci-fi action thriller starring Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe as Sid 6.7, the ultimate killing machine, and the movie is 1995's Virtuosity. This movie is ultra cheesy, but you have to admire its ambition in trying to create something unique. It's a flawed film without question, but it's also delightfully nostalgic to go back and look at what Virtuosity showcased as cutting-edge technology. However, it's also a fast-paced sci-fi story shoehorned surprisingly well into the action thriller formula, and then you get Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe driving the entertainment factor. Both of these guys dive all in on these roles. It makes this movie a good time. Washington's a great ex-cop with an edge to him, and Crowe is just world class over the top as this virtual reality simulation that comes to life and wreaks havoc. It's really as absurd as it sounds, but the performances aren't too bad at all, and the action is effective, and this movie is just completely unordinary and completely out of the box, and that's why it's a great time. Coming in at number 95 is the first and presumably not the last of the Jean-Claude Van Damme movies that will ultimately make this list. In this one, he would go undercover into prison to seek out a killer of killers. The film is 1990's Death Warrant. After starring in two great martial arts flicks, Jean-Claude Van Damme stepped into the mainstream with his prison action flick Death Warrant. Now, admittedly, this movie does work itself down the cliche checklist, and it really doesn't bring anything incredibly new to the table, but I think it does the formula extremely well, and it has a nice balance of strong performances and gritty production design, a well-structured blend of plot layers, and Van Damme showcasing both his action ability and his on-screen charisma. It's a very well-directed film. The action, I think, is visually appealing, and the supporting cast is surprisingly strong. You got Robert Guillaume, he's very good. Art LaFleur is fantastic. He takes the typical evil warden role and really makes it his own, and Patrick Kilpatrick, I think, steals the show as Van Damme's nemesis, the Sandman. I wasn't lying, guys. Moving along to my number 94 pick is another Jean-Claude Van Damme film. This one, he plays a fugitive on the run who decides to help a small family from a group of dirty land developers, because when the law can't protect the innocent, the only hero left is an outlaw in 1993's Nowhere to Run. I certainly enjoy this movie more than most people do. It's a bit subdued for a 90s action flick from Jean-Claude Van Damme, but I think that's where the appeal does lie. Van Damme forms this surprisingly endearing charm with a young Kieran Culkin that invests you in this mission to save this family despite being a fugitive on the run. Admittedly, this is a generic action flick with a lot of plug-and-play pieces woven into it, but there's just enough of an emotional connection to the family that I think makes the film film work. Joss Ackland and Ted Levine are great villains. They give Van Damme more than enough of a fight to keep the film moving. Now, I'll admit the action in this one is far from as flashy as what you're going to get in other Van Damme romps, and he doesn't deliver many of his trademark moves, but I can appreciate this deviation from his usual tendencies, and I think the movie holds up better than some of his more popular titles. Moving along to number 93 is a film about a man left behind on a desolate planet for machines and people who were deemed obsolete, where he would find one last battle to fight, and that man would be Kurt Russell, and the film would be 1998 Soldier, directed by Paul W.S. Anderson. This movie, I think, is a bit forgotten. Again, it doesn't really do anything hugely unique, but I think it's a very well-structured blend of genre tropes woven into a story that is able to line itself with a surprising amount of heart. You get Russell almost feeling like this unloved dog that has so much to offer, and it creates this just naturally sympathetic connection to him that I think injects a ton of intrigue into a story that generally wouldn't have so much of that from an emotional aspect. The sci-fi elements are appealing. The world building is fun. Soldier is a movie that provides an action-packed escape with a heartfelt core that's really all cemented by the performance from Russell that I think it gets a bit overlooked for how effective it is for the needs of this film. Admittedly, yes, Soldier does get a bit cheesy in spots and some of the effects are dated, but that's kind of all part of the nostalgia of action thrillers from the late 90s. Next up at number 92 is a forgotten gem from the writers who created Back to the Future, about a group of guys who all came to the wrong place at the wrong time, and I'm talking about 1992's Trespass from director Walter Hill, starring a fantastic ensemble cast led by Ice-T, Bill Paxton, Ice Cube, and William Sadler. This is certainly both an underrated and a hidden gem from the early 90s. It's written by Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis and directed by Walter Hill, and the result is a just well-structured and well-built action movie that has just enough moving pieces and practical action and a continual heightening of the suspense that all builds to a very satisfying closing. I think Trespass is a unique film for what it is. It's filled with tension and lots of action that's really just all built from grounded situations. It's filled with a great ensemble cast and just kick-ass characters that are badass, from the main characters down to the supporting players. Trespass also has a great soundtrack to it, but what really cements this film is its on-location shoot. The practical sets give this movie the gritty, lived-in vibe that it needs, and the direction from Hill uses this desolate playground perfectly for the needs of the story. And closing out this first cluster of 10 films at number 91 is a solid sequel to an iconic 80s flick, and it is RoboCop 2 from 1990, directed by Irvin Kershner, with Peter Weller returning as RoboCop to protect the innocent citizens of old Detroit when an evil robot is created by a rogue member of the OCP. Now, RoboCop 2 is far from the epic level of filmmaking that the first was able to accomplish, and it is missing that atmosphere of Verhoeven's 87 classic. This movie certainly tries to replicate that with waves of ultra-violence and a barrage of F-bombs, which naturally don't work because that isn't what made Verhoeven's film so fantastic. There's also a slightly trashy vibe to this movie, but it isn't all bad. Peter Weller returns as RoboCop, Nancy Allen returns as well, and they do elevate this rather uninspired plot. There's also an added level of self-awareness that doesn't really work either, but there's a lot of fun action to watch and plenty of memorable moments. RoboCop 2 was far from great, but it's more than serviceable, and I think as the years pass and more sequels and reboots hit cinemas and the small screen, RoboCop 2 has slowly gotten better considering its competition. Coming in at number 90 is a modestly forgotten computer thriller that I think still holds up well, from 1995, starring Sandra Bullock as a computer programmer that realizes escape is impossible when you're caught in the net, directed by Irwin Winkler. Now, I'll admit this movie is more of a pure thriller than a traditional action flick, but I enjoy it and I think the action does hit nicely and it's a suspenseful ride. It's fun to go back and look at what was considered cutting edge technology, yet despite all the aging of the tech, the ability to have your identity erased or stolen is even more prevalent today than it was back in the mid 90s. The plot does keep a nice consistent pace. It doesn't muddle itself with unneeded story layers and it keeps the focus on Bullock, who delivers a fantastic performance. She brings all the emotional range. She feels like a normal person and she really brings life to this role and she lands all the action effectively as well. I think Dennis Miller is a lovable supporting character and really the main weakness for me in the net is, I'd say, the performance from Jeremy Northam, who just doesn't work for me as the villain. Otherwise, this is an enjoyable cyber thriller from the mid 90s. Sticking with that theme of forgotten gems for my number 89 movie, it's a moody crime drama with a lot of action to it. It would star Harrison Ford as a man bound by duty. It would also star Brad Pitt as a man trapped by destiny, and both would discover what they're willing to fight for in 1997's The Devil's Own, directed by Alan J. Pakula. Now, I always enjoy movies that showcase two actors from different generations that are able to just go toe-to-toe with one another, and that's what I think The Devil's Own provides with both Harrison Ford and Brad Pitt. The story here does have its pacing issues, and while it is a serviceable plot, it's not necessarily an overly captivating one. I think this limits the films in terms of being an intriguing thriller. However, with the awesome performances from Pitt and Ford, the spots of suspense, and the gritty sequences of gunplay and violence, that The Devil's Own is a capable action flick with a little bit more meat on its bones than the genre usually provided from that era. I think the Boston settings gives the film an appealing backdrop, and overall the atmosphere in this movie is a strong positive. This may not be a film that will resonate with you long term, but when you sit down for it, what it does provide will grab and hold on to your attention. Now, my number 88 pick is certainly much more well-known. It's based on the comic book characters that became famous for their cartoon series. They're 4 mutant turtles that are also teenage ninjas that are heroes in a half shell, and the film would be their first live-action feature, 1990's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. This film could be a surprising pick to many of you guys, but I think when you break it down, this is an entertaining action adventure with surprisingly advanced fight choreography. This is still the best big screen live-action version of the Ninja Turtles we've ever gotten, and I think it's because of its effective balance of elements. The costumes still look cool, the comical banter between the brothers cements their bond nicely, and the story, despite its by-the-numbers plot, has a quick, engaging pace to it. And I know it sounds cliche, but what I really love about this movie is how it brings the cartoon that I grew up watching to life on the big screen. This movie feels lived in, it's just gritty enough, and despite the passing of the years, the fight sequences in this one still hold up, and it's always a great time to go back and see the Ninja Turtles kicking ass. Next up at number 87 is a solid indie film from a rookie director that never really gained the same popularity of its big Hollywood sequel. The film would star Carlos Gallegos as a mariachi with a guitar in his hand and a price on his head. He wasn't looking for trouble, but it came looking for him in 1992's El Mariachi, directed by Robert Rodriguez. I'd consider El Mariachi to be about as raw as filmmaking can get. It was crafted on less than $8,000, and it gives the movie such a strong realism that I think makes it feel like you're living in this story with these characters. Now, I will admit the story is a bit thin, the plot layering is limited as well, but Rodriguez's direction and the brutal violence compensate for it nicely. The culture is really steeped into this film. The lack of studio polish is really a strong bonus. The performances admittedly are hit and miss. The pacing is a bit uneven, and it's certainly not as widely popular as its well-known sequel Desperado, starring Antonio Banderas, but El Mariachi is indie filmmaking at its finest, and the vibe of this movie can just capture your imagination as a man with a guitar case full of weapons flees a group of hitmen throughout the back streets of Mexico. Moving along to my number 86 movie, I have a sci-fi thriller that has gained a cult following over the years, but it's one that's still underappreciated. It's directed by Martin Campbell. It stars Ray Liotta and Ernie Hudson as prisoners in a futuristic prison where there is no walls, there is no guards, and there is no escape, from 1994. I would consider No Escape to be one of the more hidden gems on this list. It's a sound film on many levels, yet it's never gotten a proper release on Blu-ray, and it's rarely on streaming services. However, I think it's a great action thriller with a very immersive dystopian setting, enjoyable layers of suspense, and gritty performances. Liotta, more a dramatic actor, is able to feel like an action lead here, and he's more than capable in the action department. Now, the depiction of 2022 was a little bit off, but this movie's apocalyptic setting is just a perfect playground for all the thrilling action and the inspiring world building. Stuart Wilson brings a ton of just charming gravitas to his role. Lance Henriksen and Ernie Hudson deliver strong performances as well, and the production design is, I think, nicely detailed to make this just a very an action film you can really escape into that has more substance than you're usually given during these types of films. Now, my number 85 pick is also another one of those forgotten gems I would consider from the late 90s. It's a ridiculously silly action comedy set inside the world of a socially anxious hitman with a bad stomach, played by Mark Wahlberg, and the movie is The Big Hit from 1998, also starring Lou Diamond Phillips and Christina Applegate. To be honest, I just love this movie for its over-the-top absurdity. Wahlberg is the star. He has his moments of humor, and he's certainly able to deliver all the stunt work needed to make all the dazzling choreography in this film look cool. But really, the true star of this film is Lou Diamond Phillips as the villain, who just steals the show with a hilariously excessive performance. The Big Hit is like a parody of the assassin genre without being a parody of the assassin genre, and the alternate reality created in this movie is just a humorous guilty pleasure escape. It's super cheesy in places, but it has a short runtime and a tight, consistent pace to it. The ensemble cast is very strong as well, and when this movie is leaning into the full throttle action, which is frequently, The Big Hit is just a wildly delightful ride of nonsense and hyper-violent killing with a contagiously lighthearted charisma to it. We're going to stick with that Hitman theme for my number 84 pick, but this movie is a little bit more serious. It's also a hit woman flick starring Bridget Fonda as a woman who was given a choice by the government, death or life as an assassin, and there's no turning back because she has reached the point of no return, from 1993, directed by John Badham. This remake of La Femme Nikita is not quite to the level of its original, but I think Bridget Fonda just kicks ass in this movie. She brings more than enough screen presence to pull off the wide range of layers needed for this role. She feels vulnerable and timid at times, but in complete control and relentless during other moments, and her performance is what makes this movie a thrilling ride of intrigue and manipulation and killing. The pace is pretty swift, the story layers are continually moving, and the action is adrenaline pumping with a strong supporting cast led by Gabriel Byrne. I think everybody is able to really elevate their roles, and Point of No Return doesn't really get the attention it deserves. Sure, it was another American remake that maybe came out a bit too soon, but the energy from Fonda's performance is more than enough to validate its existence as one of the best action flicks from the decade, in my opinion. I have another of what I would consider to be a modestly forgotten action flick for my number 83 pick. It's an action thriller that thrives in the shadows from director Sam Raimi. In the darkest hour, there's a light that shines on every human being, all but one, Darkman from 1990, starring Liam Neeson and Frances McDormand. Darkman is Frankenstein meets Phantom of the Opera meets vigilante superhero, and the result is a thrilling adventure with a strong emotional core that has a surprising amount of sincerity to it. I think Raimi's direction is fantastic. He stages the large action set pieces skillfully, and he also brings an intimacy to the quiet moments of the story that gives the movie more emotional grittiness than you would expect. And then you have to really commend the performance from Liam Neeson as Darkman. He's really just shrouded in gauze and gnarly skin, but Neeson is still able to bring heart to this man that connects to the viewer, to have you rooting for his success. And I think the ambition this film shows in the action department results action sequences that are still very much visually appealing all these years later. Some of the digital effects do look a tad dated, but for the time, this movie looked great, and it still looks good enough all these years later to make it a fun, enjoyable, nostalgic ride. The Cop Who Won't Ever Stop is back for my number 82 pick, but this time Tommy Lee Jones is chasing down a lot more than just a fugitive when he plays cat and mouse with Wesley Snipes in the modestly forgotten action gem U.S. Marshals from 1998. I think from top to bottom, U.S. Marshals is a well-crafted action thriller that's skillfully acted and filled with enough action to really elevate the energy when needed, and I think had it not been a sequel to the massively successful The Fugitive, that this movie would have been much more remembered. The plot does get a bit convoluted in the back half, but it's more than enough to capture your imagination and have you guessing. There's spots of suspense, moments of drama, a little bit of mystery, sprinkles of prickly humor from Jones, and the characters are all appealing. Jones's personality is definitely much more robust in this one, but I think it works, and Snipes is awesome as well. He's really able to bring the physicality of an action star to this film, but he also has the acting chops to go pair to pair with Jones, and I think it makes this hunt for an escaped fugitive a very engaging ride. The action stays grounded for the most part. It fits nicely into the fabric of the story, and the massive plane crash in this film is still a wild watch all these years later. And for my number 81 pick, I have a fun, waterlogged action thriller starring Christian Slater as an armored truck driver who must stand between a group of criminals and $3 million during the worst storm in living memory in 1998's Hard Rain, also starring Morgan Freeman, Minnie Driver, and Randy Quaid. Now, the plot of Hard Rain is admittedly generic. It's a simple heist flick with all the usual trimmings, but the rain and flooding are a great added element and far from just a gimmick. The rising waters create a charming element of tension during many moments, and the action is mindless fun with plenty of gunplay and chase sequences like racing jet skis through a flooded high school. It's just a good time. I think the cast elevates the material. They're all going in on these performances. Slater is a solid lead, Minnie Driver is a strong addition, and both Morgan Freeman and Randy Quaid give Hard Rain two very efficient villains. It's also kind of fun to see Freeman play against type, and Quaid is just perfect as the sleazy sheriff. The film also keeps a tight pace. It doesn't wear out its welcome. I think the story is able to connect the weather-themed action together nicely, and the atmosphere of this movie overall just make the movie just mindless fun overall. Coming in at number 80 is a forgotten action flick with hilarious waves of comedy. It stars Michael J. Fox as Hollywood's most spoiled movie star and James Woods as New York's angriest cop, and the only way these two are going to get along is The Hard Way from 1991, directed by John Badham. I think this movie definitely still holds up over the years because of the delightfully bristly chemistry between Fox and Woods. This story is well paced and I think able to effectively balance the humor with all the action. As a killer called the Party Crasher strikes the Big Apple, I think Fox is humorous as this whiny actor coming out to New York to research for a role that will give his career some validity, with James Woods delivering a world-class performance as this just burnt-out detective that's perpetually enraged. I think the script fills the story with just enough subplots, and the supporting cast with names like Annabella Sciorra and Luis Guzman and Stephen Lang and LL Cool J elevate their roles easily, I think, and with the practical stunt work, I think it all gives this movie a lasting visual appeal, along with just, I would consider, a vibrant finale that's more than satisfying. Moving along to number 79 is the first Arnold sighting on the list. In this one, he would play a U.S. Marshal deputy that can erase your past to protect your future, and that's what he would do in this adrenaline-pumping thriller that's called Eraser from 1996, directed by Chuck Russell. Now, you could really consider this to be, I think, Arnold's last big box office hit that wasn't a Terminator movie or something from another franchise, and really, despite the flashy technology on display and its, at the time, cutting-edge special effects, this is a film that sort of came out maybe 8 to 10 years too late. It has a very strong 80s progression and vibe to it. Then you get these bold splashes of digital effects that were typical of the mid to late 90s that hold up modestly well, yet there is something fun and mindless about this movie. Arnold and Vanessa Williams are not that good together, but I think James Caan is an enthusiastic villain. But I think what makes this movie fun overall is the action. I think Eraser gives Arnold tons to do, from taking out bad guys by hand, to diving out of planes, to shooting alligators, to wielding these massive weapons, commando style. He's never not commanding the screen, and that's what makes this movie hold up. My number 78 pick is a French action thriller. Its American remake, Point of No Return, has already been mentioned on this list. This original is written and directed by Luc Besson and features a new kind of lethal weapon. She has no fear, she's sweet, she's loving, and she kills. In 1990s, Nikita, also known as La Femme Nikita, starring Anne Perriot. Now, I think this movie delivers a riveting blend of psychological thriller and full-out action romp as a woman is forced into training to be an assassin. I think the Perriot's performance is perfect for this plot as she goes through really the ups and downs of the life that's thrown at her. She has a vulnerability to her during the softer, quieter moments of the movie, and as she evolves into this assassin, she really is able to showcase the needed range to believe her as being a viable killing machine. The story is able to provide more than enough intrigue. I think that really helps elevate the uneasiness and the tension of the gritty action, and Besson directs the hell out of this movie. The action sequences are just shot with killer practical effects. It doesn't always go smoothly for this character. She's routinely forced to adapt to different situations, and I think that's what makes the movie much more engaging for you to root for this character to succeed against these waves of enemies, which really results in an elegant violence that makes this movie sort of unique to its own. Next up at number 77 is certainly a forgotten military action thriller. The tagline was "One shot, one kill, no exceptions." The movie is 1993 Sniper, directed by Luis Loza, starring Tom Berenger and Billy Zane as snipers behind enemy lines. To me, Sniper is one of those strong action films from the early 90s that just doesn't get mentioned as often as it should. It's admittedly a familiar progression inside the world of these military-themed mission movies, but the world of Snipers, I think, is explored more than enough to add a unique layering to what I would otherwise be just a simple turn-and-burn action romp. It's not necessarily deep at all, but it is filled with suspense, and it's a surprisingly effective psychological thriller at times, which I think does blend well with the emotionally charged performances from Berenger and Zane. A veteran sniper is paired with this NSC agent to take out a South American politician, and it is a thrilling ride. The jungle locations are immersive, and the direction from Loza is fantastic, and I think Sniper is a movie that can really keep you on the edge of your seat. It has characters you can connect with, and when the intensity ramps up, the violence is plenty satisfying. Coming up next at number 76 is an undermentioned action thriller with a gritty international setting starring Jean-Claude Van Damme as a man searching for the killer of a twin brother he never knew he had, and the closer he gets to the truth, the closer he gets to the edge. In 1996's Maximum Risk, directed by Ringo Lam, co-starring Natasha Henstridge. This movie was a mild success towards the end of Van Damme's run, and I think it gets a bad rap. On paper, it's a pretty basic plot that feels like it was pulled from the 80s, yes, but on the other hand, when you watch it, I think there was much more to Maximum Risk. Ringo Lam's direction is very solid. He does the action extremely well with a practical focus. The international locales give the plot an immersive and very gritty vibe that I think all works well. I think Van Damme is toned down a bit here, but he pairs well with Henstridge on this mission for answers. You can tell Van Damme's attempting to kind of bring a nuanced performance here, which doesn't always work, but when the action is at full speed, it's a delight. I think Lamb frames the chase and fight sequences extremely well, and despite not being one of Van Damme's flashier flicks, Maximum Risk provides some of the more violent and complex fight choreography of his run during the 90s. Next up at number 75 is an iconic early 90s gem about an LA detective that was left for dead by hired assassins, and he's waited 7 years to even the score because this detective is hard to kill, from 1990, starring Steven Seagal, William Sadler, and Kelly LeBrock. This was Seagal's second film, and he definitely delivered all you could hope for from an action star, outside of running with any trace of masculinity, I guess. Regardless of that, Hard to Kill remains a charming showcase of Seagal's skills in Aikido as he takes out dudes in a variety of just pleasantly and brutally violent ways. This essentially feels again like an 80s action movie, down to its just corny amnesia plot. But despite its hilarity, this is a sound action film. It delivers a buffet of just hyper violence, endless waves of bravado, and Seagal dropping cheesy one-liners like he's a veteran in the genre. Plus, with it being one of his earlier films, his ego hadn't really yet hit the stratosphere, so he gets to take a beating in this movie from the bad guys when needed, which makes his turn at redemption that much more rewarding, with William Sadler providing this movie the truly slimy villain that it needed. My number 74 film features one of the all-time action icons there ever has been, and another hot up-and-comer in Hollywood at the time who would both star as professional hitmen from different generations that would face off in 1995's Assassins, directed by Richard Donner. Now, Stallone was sort of hit and miss at the box office during this portion of the 90s, and much like his performance in The Specialist the year before this one, he does feel a bit lifeless in this movie compared to his action icon status. He does certainly fit the needs of the film, and I think with Donner's direction, there is a sleek, polished vibe to this movie that makes it easily consumable, I guess you could say. It's really just a playfully violent game of cat and mouse between assassins from different generations, but I think what makes this movie so much fun is the endlessly vibrant performance from Antonio Banderas, who comes in and effortlessly steals this movie. Without Banderas, Assassins would feel bland and a bit flat tonally. However, with his delivery of his mannerisms and his expressions and his just tone and his sadistic mischievousness, it's really one of the better action movie villains of the 90s with this performance. And I think Stallone and Banderas going to toe-to-toe throughout really gives Assassins a thrilling and highly engaging pace that can easily lure you in when you sit down to watch it. Moving along to my number 73 film is a great little action flick centered on the most important man in the country aboard the surest plane technology can create, that also happens to be filled with the most dangerous hijackers in the world, when Harrison Ford would play the president in 1997's Air Force One, also starring Gary Oldman, Glenn Close, and William H. Macy. Now, is this movie simply a die-hard retread on an airplane? Certainly. However, it goes through the motions of the contained action thriller formula with precision, and the political angle with Ford as the president is certainly enough to heighten the stakes. Ford does go all in on this performance. He feels presidential, yet when the situation calls, he's more than capable as an action hero. I think Glenn Close and Dean Stockwell and William H. Macy all leave strong impressions on this movie, and Gary Oldman holds his own next to Ford in terms of gravitas as the villain. It's really just a quickly paced story that sticks to the basics, and there's no denying that Air Force One is built on recycled elements, but it can still easily engage you with a nicely crafted action sequences as Ford fights to save his family, all while thousands of feet up in the air. I have a gritty little action thriller for my number 72 movie. If you have a secret, he knows it. If you have a weakness, he exploits it. And if you have anything good in your life, he will destroy it. That's why they call him the Corruptor, from 1999, starring Chow Yun-fat and Marky Mark Wahlberg. Now, this is one of those movies that just has a seedy vibe to it that's really able to complement the subject matter extremely well. It's an escape into the criminal underworld of Chinatown, with Chow Yun-fat and Mark Wahlberg serving up an effective duo with their uneasy rapport. This was when Hollywood was really making its push for Chow Yun-fat as an action hero, and I think he more than delivered. This movie is filled with twists and turns and plenty of bold and eccentric characters, and with a capable blend of tense action as well, and I think Wahlberg is fine. He doesn't necessarily command the screen or anything. However, Chow Yun-fat carries the charm, the energy, and the intrigue for both of them. The Corruptor is a cop thriller where there really aren't any good guys, which I think does give the film a unique twist, and when the bullets are flying and the gritty violence is taking center stage, this is a movie that can keep you on the edge of your seat and invested in the two arcs of its lead characters. There's something dangerous in the air with my number 71 movie, a supercharged film filled with stunt work that would take crime to new heights. That film would be 1994's Drop Zone, starring Wesley Snipes, Yancey Butler, and Gary Busey, from director John Badham again. Now, I'll assume I like this movie more than most people. It's, yes, a traditional action thriller with a heist and a fuel of revenge at the core, but it's all nestled nicely into the world of skydiving to create a fun-filled ride with suspense and plenty of visually appealing action that's fueled by a lot of stunt work. I think Gary Busey is great as the eccentric villain. Snipes is strong as usual, front and center as the star. There's a charming summer atmosphere to this movie that I always enjoy. I really do appreciate the unique elements that it stitches onto this tried and true action formula. I think Snipes is more than charming as he's driven to find the killer of his brother, and the inevitable clash with Busey and his gang is a fun build-up. I think Busey is not completely unhinged here, but he is close enough to fill this vibe of a maniacal villain. Snipes gets his time to drop it out and fight down with the bad guys, and the practical effects and the vibrant musical scoring in Drop Zone make it a charismatic summer romp up in the skies. In at number 70 is an action thriller set on the river, centered on a burnt-out cop assigned to river duty, but they shouldn't have put him in the water if they didn't want him to make some waves, and that's exactly what Bruce Willis does in 1993's Striking Distance, also starring Sarah Jessica Parker and Dennis Farina. Now, this movie does have its flaws. Front and center would be Sarah Jessica Parker and Bruce Willis lacking basically any chemistry at all. Willis also feels like he's mildly checked out and kind of just relying on borrowed character tropes to fill out this performance, but I still think the river element and the family dynamics of Striking Distance create a history that builds an engaging lived-in atmosphere for this story. It has strong elements of a mystery as the bodies keep piling up in the river, and I think the supporting cast is very strong, led by Dennis Farina. This one certainly does go through the genre motions, I won't deny that, but the splashes of action ramp up the intensity when needed, and the moody vibe of this film can really lure you in despite its predictability. I mean, Striking Distance is not flashy and it lacks a lot of charisma, but the action is well staged, it's gritty enough, and the chase sequences, both on the streets and out in the river, are adrenaline pumping, which does make this an unassumingly fun ride. Next up at number 69 is an underrated Jean-Claude Van Damme flick set at a hockey game. They said Game 7 would be a war, but they didn't know the half of it because terror is going into overtime. In 1995's Sudden Death from director Peter Hyams, also starring the late great Powers Booth. I'm not going to sit here and argue that Sudden Death isn't a die-hard retread. However, the timing of this plot with the progression of the hockey game is undeniably effective at ramping up the tension and keeping the pace moving and making this film so engaging. The stadium is a fantastic playground for all the action, and Van Damme is all over the building, from the basement to the rooftop to the ice during the game. And yes, it's all admittedly a bit silly, yet more than fun enough for a fast-paced thrill ride with Van Damme in the lead. I think Powers Booth really does just take this generic role. He completely sells it to make it the character his own. And sure, this movie is framed on borrowed elements, but the hockey infusion makes it more than unique enough to stand on its own. Sudden Death would come towards the end of Van Damme's A-list run, but the action holds up nicely for a turn your brain off adventure. Moving along to number 68 is, I think, the first full-on buddy comedy to hit this list, and it's an iconic one when the East would team with the West, two cops, one that's all talk, the other's all action, and they would be Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker in 1998's Rush Hour. I would assume many would put this film higher up on their lists, and I certainly do enjoy this film, but the teaming up of Chan and Tucker just didn't grab me like they seemingly did for the rest of the world at the time. The humor in Rush Hour feels a bit one note, and it's more chuckle-worthy than it is laughable, but I won't deny when the action kicks in, this movie is delightfully satisfying. Moments of action are humorous, others are suspenseful, and the two tones, I think, really do complement one another well. I think Tucker gets his shots of action, but really, it's all fueled by the stunt work and the martial arts skill of Jackie Chan, because when Chan's doing his thing, this movie's a blast. The action set pieces, the choreography, they're all sound, and really this movie, for me at least, is just missing a charismatic villain. However, as it stands, Rush Hour is still a very strong film from the decade. Now, my number 67 movie was heralded as the next great action adventure, and it was headlined by arguably the biggest action star in the world, with Arnold Schwarzenegger, when he would star in 1993's Last Action Hero, directed by John McTiernan. This is certainly a movie that has aged pretty well over time and garnered more appreciation over recent years. It's far from a perfect flick, I won't tell you that, but you do have to kind of appreciate its ambitiously unique plot. Last Action Hero is an action movie inside of an action movie, and the meta layering and the over-the-top sequences are fun to watch. This film is filled with spectacle and dumb laughs, and I think it's all effective with Arnold behind the wheel, showcasing his comedic chops while also reminding people why he is an action icon. Sure, this movie gets dumb more often than not, but that's kind of the point. And seeing Arnold just parody the action genre that he helped build, it's filled with all the massive action you would expect, and from the cameos to the stunt work to the ridiculous one-liners and the scoring and the cartoonish villains, Last Action Hero is a timestamp to all the silliness that we loved from the action genre. Written and directed by Tom Tykwer, my number 66 pick is probably the most unique film on this list, as a young woman has just 20 minutes to come up with 100,000 Deutschmarks to save her boyfriend in the high-intensity action thriller Run Lola Run from 1998, starring Franka Potente. While probably familiar with fans of the action genre, I would say this movie is probably a bit forgotten amongst general audiences. However, it's one that I think still holds up great because of its high anxiety atmosphere and its ability to engage you in the character's decision making. Run Lola Run essentially plays out like three separate stories with their own endings that overlap and affect one another. This really adds a fun, heightened intrigue as to what's going to happen next and where things are going to go, which, to be honest, was a rarity and still really is a rarity in the action genre today. I think Potente delivers a thrilling performance. She has all that needed layering, and this film is just filled with practical action. It really gives this movie a sturdier layer of realism that's perfect for the tone of this plot and the visual look of this movie. Run Lola Run may be a film that you have seen when scrolling through streamers and never really hit play on, but I think once you do, it will sweep you up in the suspense and take you on a ride that you'll remember for quite some time. In at number 65 is another of those early in the decade action flicks that feels like it came from the 80s. It's centered on a Brooklyn cop avenging the death of his partner when Steven Seagal would be out for justice, from director John Flynn, also starring William Forsythe. I would consider this to be Seagal's probably his most violent film. It's a mashup of tropes from the action genre, but the martial arts from Seagal and his over-enthusiastic gravitas just carries the appeal as he soaks up every scene of this film with his immaculate ponytail. The fight sequences are gritty and unrelenting, and this is another of Seagal's very early 90s action films that feels like it was pulled right out of 1985. But to me, though, the true star of Out for Justice is William Forsythe, who goes about as all in on a character as you can, and that's what you want from an action movie villain. He's no physical match for Seagal, but this film's villain, through Forsythe's performance, is completely unhinged, and it elevates the movie greatly. And I think with all the gunplay and the breaking bones and the bloody violence, Out for Justice is textbook early Seagal and still one of his best. In 1998, they said it was a lethal summer with my number 64 film, a feel-good curtain call for one of the truly great action franchises. I'm of course talking about Lethal Weapon 4 from director Richard Donner, starring Mel Gibson, Danny Glover, Rene Russo, Joe Pesci, Chris Rock, and Jet Li. Now, some people may not like this entry in the franchise as much as me, and I'll admit it's nowhere near the level of the first two, but I think Lethal Weapon 4, with its mildly cheesy focus on family and an added emphasis on humor, just sort of works for me. It's like Lethal Weapon meets Rush Hour, and the added comedy may not always be everybody's cup of tea, but it doesn't really undercut the suspense either. You got Gibson and Glover, who are great together once again, and I think seeing them as aging cops does have its spots of appeal, but I think what really makes this movie work so well is just the fantastic large-scale action set pieces that rely on practical effects and old-fashioned stunt work. The freeway sequence is just as awesome today visually, and Jet Li's martial arts skills add a gritty element to this film as well, and it's just kind of nostalgic to see these characters in a more comical sense without forgetting the action roots and the buddy chemistry that made the franchise great. My number 63 film features a retired DEA agent who will take on a Jamaican drug lord. They attacked his family, they killed his partner, and they made the wrong guy very angry when Steven Seagal would be marked for death from 1990, also starring Keith David. I think everybody would agree that Seagal's first few movies were pretty much chopped and swapped pieces of the same story, yet Marked for Death works well for a few reasons. First, Keith David is a great sidekick. He elevates the film with his presence, and his chemistry with Seagal dials back Seagal's kind of gravitas just a little bit. I think the action is really fun and hyper violent and well shot overall to showcase Seagal's fast-paced fighting style, and the villains, I mean, despite being overly stereotypical, are a viable menace for Seagal. I mean, it's led by the eccentric Screwface, who's a charming wild card. Marked for Death is really, again, a Seagal movie pulled right out of the 80s. It's gritty, it's unassumingly cheesy in places, and it just all gels together to deliver a quick-moving action thriller that doesn't really do anything new, but gives its lead plenty of opportunities to kill bad guys in a variety of ways, and sometimes that's all you really want from an action film. Moving along to my number 62 film is another one written and directed by Luc Besson about the perfect assassin, an innocent witness, and a detective who took things way too far in 1994's The Professional, also known as Leon, starring Jean Reno, Natalie Portman, Gary Oldman, and Danny Aiello. Now, I assume many people would have this film higher up on their lists, and I do think it's a fantastic movie. I love it. I think the action when it hits is hyper violent and unyielding. The performances from Reno and Portman are also able to give their chance friendship an element of sincerity that you can't help but invest in, and Besson's direction is some of his finest work, with also Gary Oldman delivering an ultra sleazy role in the villain. His sadistic charisma is really just perfect for the needs of this story, and I think Oldman delivers one of the decade's most vile bad guys. But even though I do enjoy all the action and that I do think it's perfect for the needs of this film, The Professional for me plays more like a drama fueled with gritty suspense, and when sitting down for an action movie, this wouldn't necessarily be a title I would seek out. And in at 61 is a wildly fun action sci-fi thriller with a total 80s vibe to it. It stars Dolph Lundgren as a Houston cop up against something that isn't human, and Craig R. Baxley's I Come in Peace, also known as Dark Angel, from 1990. Now, this movie is pure 80s cheese, and I love it. Dolph Lundgren is fantastic in the lead. This movie centers on, listen to this, an alien drug dealer coming to Earth to harvest a drug for his planet that comes from human bodies, and it's as amazing as it is ridiculous. The alien essentially uses compact discs that shoot out of its arm to kill people, and it's a riot of mindless action. Lundgren is delivering one-liners as this movie goes through the genre checklist, but it's still a great time. It's unique despite its absurdity, and it's filled with explosive action. I mean, they must have had a coupon for pyrotechnics, because the slow motion motion shots of characters running from massive explosions are plentiful, and I Come in Peace is just mindlessly engaging because of how wildly out of the box it is, and Matthias Hughes is great as the massive villain who comes in peace but eventually goes in pieces. My number 60 movie centers on the world's most skilled thief. He's cunning, he's devious, and treacherous. You never reveal your name, you never turn your back, and you never surrender your heart to The Saint from 1997, starring Val Kilmer and Elizabeth Shue from director Philip Noyce. Now, to me, The Saint is a film that really thrives on the atmosphere of its international settings and just overall how it explores a master thief skilled in the art of disguises. The plot is plenty interesting. It does have its holes, and the pacing can be a little bit iffy in places, but it's still a great ride of charming action layered with elements of espionage while also being an interesting heist film with an undercurrent of love carried effectively by Shue and Kilmer. Now, admittedly, Kilmer has more than a few of his cheesy scenes here, but I think he carries it well, and his charm does make the role work. I think Shue's a bit overly meek for the needs of the narrative. I think she could have been a bit stronger and the story could have still worked, but it's far from a deal breaker, and in the end, the creative action sequences this movie provides makes The Saint hold up as one of the decade's best. Moving along to number 59 is an action thriller that I think is a bit forgotten. It's set in the countryside, but vacation is over in 1994's The River Wild, starring Meryl Streep and Kevin Bacon from director Curtis Hanson. This is one of those movies that I think can certainly come in and catch you by surprise. Yes, it does have its plot conveniences and spots of predictability, but it's nothing that gets in the way of this thrilling ride of suspense being able to capture your imagination. You have Meryl Streep and Kevin Bacon driving this film, so it's extremely well acted. I think Bacon really leans into the psychopath role so effortlessly, and it's really just great for the needs of this quick-moving, real-time thriller. Streep has to survive the river and the bad guys to save her family, and it's surprisingly compelling and easily engaging. Sure, it has its familiar subplots, but I think they're all done well to frame the action, and with the on-location shoots out in the wilderness on these raging rivers, the immersion level of The River Wild is one of its bright spots. But really, I think this movie just comes down to the cat and mouse game between Streep and Bacon with their charged performances that will leave you anticipating each move they make. You're going to want to prepare to go ballistic for my number 58 movie, a big, flashy, stylish action flick from the late half of the decade, directed by John Woo, starring John Travolta and Christian Slater, and that film would, of course, be 1996's Broken Arrow. There were few things better in the late 90s than the eccentric direction of John Woo and the equally flamboyant acting of John Travolta, and Broken Arrow slaps them together for a military-themed action romp, and the result is just a pure adrenaline ride of masculinity and one-liners and waves of elegant action. Christian Slater is thrown into the mix, and sure, his performance is Slater being Slater, but for the needs of the movie, it works, and I think he and Travolta are able to make the most of this tried-and-true friends-turned-enemies trope with a nuclear twist. I mean, sure, Broken Arrow is cheesy in many places. It's melodramatic enough for 10 movies, but that's all part of the fun. This movie relies on the action, and it's well staged from the fight scenes to the variety of chase sequences and shootouts and other action set pieces. This movie is non-stop, and with the reliance on practical stunt work and effects with a touch of digital effects on the side, Broken Arrow is a great time to watch. My number 57 pick is a political thriller about an assassin on the loose, a president in danger, and one old Secret Service agent that will stand in between them, and that man is Clint Eastwood and Wolfgang Petersen's In the Line of Fire from 1993, also starring Rene Russo and John Malkovich. Now, the deadly game of cat and mouse is certainly what I think makes In the Line of Fire such a riveting ride of suspense and close calls. Eastwood is solid as the aging Secret Service agent, and his bristly demeanor is perfect for the needs of the role. His romantic subplot with Rene Russo is laughable nostalgia from the 90s, but I mean, really the true star of this film, outside of the nicely layered script, is the sadistic performance from John Malkovich. I mean, we've seen this sort of role before, but in the hands of Malkovich, it's completely unique, and he really does hold his own next to Eastwood in terms of screen presence. This is one of those movies where you can naturally assume the ending of, but watching it get there with its methodical pace and through Peterson's direction can capture your attention and really keep you locked in on every move until the end credits roll. We're going to take things back to the action genre basics for my number 56 movie. When the streets are a jungle, there can only be one king, and that man would be Jean-Claude Van Damme in Lionheart from 1990, directed by Sheldon Lettich. Jean-Claude Van Damme would go from martial arts movies to fighting cyborgs to fighting for family in Lionheart, and I think this little movie still holds up well as one of the earlier films in Van Damme's resume where he showcased some of his dramatic acting. I think this street fighting movie is really the perfect vehicle for Van Damme to deliver all his trademark action, and there is plenty of it, from fighting under overpasses to garages to pools to the lavish backyards of the wealthy who love seeing man fight man, and it's just a blast of 80s nostalgia wrapped up in this early 90s film, layered with Van Damme kicks. I think Lettich's direction is capable, and it results in, I think, a high adrenaline action movie with a strong undercurrent of heart to make it all mean something. Lionheart really does keep a strong forward pace. It's filled with cheesy bravado, and it delivers a tried and true showdown filled with melodrama and a one-of-a-kind villain that will leave a smile on your face. Next up at number 55 is a military-themed action film with a twist of comedy and tons of drama from director David O. Russell. In A War Without Heroes, They Were Kings, Three Kings from 1999, starring Ice Cube, George Clooney, and Mark Wahlberg. Now, right out of the gate, Three Kings does have many things working in its favor. It's extremely well written. The story is very smart with the humanity to it, and it's very well cast. The performances, I think, are fantastic, led by Cube and Clooney and Wahlberg. And I think this premise overall is a unique spin on the traditional war movie, because Three Kings really is a Desert Storm heist film with strong impressions of humor and a heartfelt core that gives it all some meaning and then makes it all worth something. So, I mean, this is a movie that can easily pull you in on this mission to steal some gold, and then you get the direction from Russell that I think really does bring things up many notches, because his film techniques here give Three Kings a lasting visual appeal with his use of handheld and Steadicam techniques. I mean, you really do feel like you're in the tension of many of these dramatic situations, and it can get you pulled up in your seat when the bullets are flying during the action as well. Now, my number 54 movie has a great cast, and it's set inside the world of an assassin who can't be stopped because he has no identity outside of just being known as the Jackal from 1997, starring Bruce Willis, Richard Gere, and Sidney Poitier from director Michael Caton Jones. Assuming you can overlook the ridiculous accent from Richard Gere, The Jackal is a methodical assassin flick with equal elements of elegance and grittiness to it as it explores the underground methodologies of a contract killer. I think Bruce Willis is the smoothest hitman in cinematic history with his performance here, as he captures just a unassumingly sadistic killer with a layer of charm to him and just this controlled rage that you can't wait to see explode. Richard Gere, he's okay, as I said. He's a talented actor, and he does fine for the job of this role outside of his terrible accent. But really, the true number 2 star of this film is Sidney Poitier, who comes in with a grounded and just very likable performance. The Jackal overall may not have a ton of action, but when it hits, it's fun, it's violent, it's unrelenting, and really perfect for the moods of this sleek little movie. The story, I think, feels kind of lived in, and it's really an easy escape, because when the climax hits, it's plenty satisfying as a closing for a film that I think manages to actually do something unique inside this assassin subgenre. We're going to get a lot more lighthearted with my number 53 movie, an iconic film starring two finely dressed men who protect the earth from the scum of the universe, and those two men are Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, and that movie is, of course, 1997's Men in Black from director Barry Sonnenfeld. Certainly not a straightforward action movie. I think you still gotta put Men in Black on this list because it's filled with tons of fun alien fighting action and a lot of humor from the pairing of Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith. This movie is creatively ambitious. Its visual appeal, I think, still holds up over pretty much all of the sequels. But I mean, what makes this movie so much fun, to me at least, is the world building that you can just easily escape into. Men in Black delivers a full-on lighthearted adventure filled with cosmic action, and it's a blast of adventure and humor, with Jones and Smith serving up a lights-out duo for the needs of this movie. They absolutely take the young paired with old trope and do their completely own thing with it. The direction from Sonnenfeld is effective, and from the large-scale action to the smaller action set pieces, this movie rarely has a dull moment. Now, up next at 52 is a nostalgic favorite of mine from 1992. It stars Wesley Snipes as an air marshal with a big mouth and a bad attitude, and for the terrorists on Flight 163, he's very bad news because Snipes is Passenger 57 from director Kevin Hooks. This movie is an undeniable die-hard ripoff on a plane, but it's also a reminder of how well the formula can work when done right. Snipes is confident and smooth and charming, all the things you want in one half of an action lead. Then on the other side, he delivers all the needed physicality and tough guy swagger that you want for a full-throttle action flick, and that's what Passenger 57 delivers. It doesn't waste too much time with unneeded subplots or fillers. It sticks to the mission. It really does keep its foot on the gas and flows nicely from one harrowing situation to the other, all carried effortlessly by the charisma of Snipes. From shootouts to chase sequences and a variety of fight scenes down to the textbook one-on-one final showdown, this movie is non-stop action, and with Bruce Payne soaking up every scene as the villain, Passenger 57 gives you all you could want from an early 90s action flick with a strong 80s vibe. And coming up next at 51 is an underrated sequel from 1990. It's about the ultimate hunter. It's silent, it's invisible, it's invincible, and this time it's in Los Angeles in Predator 2, starring Danny Glover and Gary Busey from director Stephen Hopkins. Now, this movie is one that I don't think ever really had a chance. It's a sequel to one of the best action movies of all time, and instead of Arnold Schwarzenegger, this one gives you Danny Glover, but I contend that if Predator didn't exist, then Predator 2 would be much more appreciated. This movie creates a strong atmosphere. It's gritty, it's a little sleazy in the right places, it's ultra violent, and it's still a kick-ass ride all these years later. Glover, of course, he's no Schwarzenegger, but he's still a strong commanding lead for this movie, and how the story maneuvers itself allows Glover to really go toe-to-toe with the Predator in believable fashion. The supporting cast is fantastic, with names like Gary Busey and Marita Conchita Alonso and Bill Paxton and Ruben Blades and others that really do elevate their characters, and it's just filled with tons of visually appealing practical action. Predator 2 is not at the level of the first film, but it's a damn fine sequel and a great action flick overall. In at number 50 is an entry in one of the great action franchises ever. The tagline was simple: the magic is back again, and it certainly was in 1992's Lethal Weapon 3, directed by Richard Donner, starring all the usual suspects, Mel Gibson and Danny Glover and Joe Pesci, and this time Renee Russo making her franchise debut. Now, while not as good as the first two, I do think Lethal Weapon 3 is still a damn good action flick with loads of just visually stunning practical effects. You get Gibson and Glover again, who are top-notch, as always in this franchise. Then you get the addition of Renee Russo and the amplification of Pesci's Leo Getz, which are all able to open the door to more humor outside of the Riggs and Murtaugh banter. I think the story overall is nicely structured. It keeps a smooth pace, and it brings a charming variety to the the action, from the explosive intro to the chase sequences, the fight scenes, and the shootout. There really is a buffet of action, all with the lovable characters that we know from this series. So it's a good time. Now, admittedly, the villain here, the ex-cop stealing weaponry, is a bit limited. I would have preferred a larger screen presence for the heavy of this movie, but as it stands, Lethal Weapon 3 is still a very engaging watch. Moving along to number 49 is a great espionage thriller about a man on a mission, not for his country and not for his honor, but for his wife and child, when Harrison Ford would star as Jack Ryan in 1992's Patriot Games, directed by Philip Noyce, also starring Ann Archer, Sean Bean, and Patrick Bergin. Admittedly, this is much more of an espionage, government agency crime drama movie than it is a traditional action flick, but I do think when the action kicks in, that Patriot Games is a suspenseful ride with a charming international atmosphere. You get Harrison Ford, who I think is exceptional in the lead. He's a viable action hero when the story needs him to be, but he also has that softer humanity to him as well, and I think that duality in his role is really what makes this movie so much more intriguing, because you truly can immerse yourself in the mission thrown at Jack Ryan's feet. I think Sean Bean and Patrick Bergin are both very strong in their roles, as well as is Ann Archer, and I think the game of cat and mouse that Patriot Games explores is well structured. It's evenly paced and capped off with a truly unnerving finale that I think will leave you plenty satisfied. Director Ernest R. Dickerson delivered a winner with my number 48 pick, set out in the wilderness where humans are hunting humans, in the often forgotten Surviving the Game from 1994, starring Ice-T, Rutger Hauer, Charles S. Dutton, Gary Busey, F. Murray Abraham, and John C. McGinley. Now, I think this is a tragically overlooked action film from the middle of the decade that takes the human hunting human formula and does it extremely well. Ice-T is great in this movie, but I think Surviving the Game shows how delightfully intense of a film you can get when the villains carry a larger screen presence than the hero does, because Howard, Dutton, and Busey are all menacing in their own way. Ice-T certainly does carry his own, with the film never taking him out of his lane. I mean, he's not really suddenly taking guys out easily. I think it makes the carried suspense of this film much more effective, as he has to kind of use his ingenuity to survive. This is also, I think, a slickly directed film. The on-location shoots out in the wilderness, much like Cliffhanger did, is really able to pull you out into the mountains with these characters, and I think it's a great ride with a world-class ensemble cast and just enough twists and turns to keep you guessing. Now, my pick for number 47 is a forgotten gem with a strong 80s vibe from director Dwight H. Little, about a man who is unarmed and extremely dangerous, in 1992's Rapid Fire, starring Brandon Lee and Powers Booth. Brandon Lee's life was tragically cut short, but I think Rapid Fire will always be a sample of what he could have provided to the action genre. To me, Rapid Fire is like Brandon Lee's Lionheart, a chance for him to lead his own film for Western audiences, and he is great as a student who sees something he shouldn't have. There's no denying this is a by-the-numbers assembly line action movie, but I think with the charisma in Lee's performance, it's just undeniable. I mean, he's charming, he's sexy, and effortless in delivering smooth, fluid fight choreography. I do wish this movie had a little bit more action to it as it goes through the motions, but what is here really does work more than well enough. I think it's really subtle, but I think the choreography in this movie is absolutely fantastic. The fight scenes and the action scenes are great, and Powers Booth is, as always, fantastic, and I think he gives the film a viable villain. You may not have seen this movie, or you may have forgotten that it even existed, but when the action is in full gear in this movie, Rapid Fire is a great time. We're going to jump hundreds of years into the future for my number 46 pick from director Luc Besson. It stars Bruce Willis, Mila Jovovich, and Gary Oldman. Time is not important, only life is important, and all life will be lost unless they find The Fifth Element from 1997. I do enjoy sitting back and watching this sci-fi extravaganza from time to time. The story is admittedly a bit messy, but it's enough to connect all the elaborate action sequences, and with the performances from Willis and Jovovich and Oldman, I think there's no shortage of screen presence to carry these focal characters. The Fifth Element, I do think, is longer than it needed to be, but I can appreciate the conceptual design, the production design, and the wardrobes, and really the world building. I think it's all more than enough to have a great time with the mental escape that this movie provides. The Fifth Element, I think, is highly engaging, and it's enough to overlook its flaws because overall I think it is well acted. The creativity in the action is edge of your seat fun, and I think the blend of practical and digital effects results in a film that visually still looks just as polished today as it did back when it was released. Next up at 45 is another of those movies that just simply has its own wild and unique tone. A terrifying evil has been unleashed, and only 5 strangers are the hope of stopping it. In 1996's From Dusk Till Dawn, starring George Clooney, Quentin Tarantino, Harvey Keitel, Juliette Lewis, and others from director Robert Rodriguez. Now, I certainly think From Dusk Till Dawn is another one of those movies that could take a run at being the most wild and over the top to make this list, and decades later, this movie still holds up as a delightfully fun, ultra-violent ride of just grindhouse mayhem and action. I think where this movie really shines is in its unique but very simple story. Don't ask too many questions, just sit back and enjoy the sadistic ride led by this fantastic ensemble cast. Clooney is as cool as a killer can be. I think Tarantino is just as eerie and demented as he needed to be. Keitel shines as the righteous one, and really, they are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of bold and vibrant personalities found inside the titty twister on this night of carnage. From Dusk Till Dawn never takes its foot off the gas. It's filled with gory spectacle and twisted humor and just endless violence. I will admit that most of the digital effects don't really hold up so well, but this movie is still a fun, nostalgic timestamp to those movies from the mid-90s. Moving along to my number 44 pick, I have a Western-themed action thriller set in a town with no justice, which means there is only one law: every man for himself. In 1996's Last Man Standing, starring Bruce Willis, Bruce Dern, Christopher Walken, and directed by Walter Hill. Now, The Last Man Standing to me is another of those films that I think was a bit overlooked when it was released. I think this movie was a direct-to-video release, if I remember correctly, but I think it delivers plenty of big screen-worthy Western-themed action. You get Bruce Willis, who's just simmering in this role as the loner who's a complete badass, and then you get the vibrant personalities of Bruce Dern and Christopher Walken, and the result is a delightfully methodical modern Western that explodes with action when the story calls for it. The gunplay and tension are effective, and The Last Man Standing is a movie that kind of just feels lived in. It's an escape into the Old West and filled with all the masculine bravado you'd expect. I think this one delivers a fun, rewarding, slow build-up. It closes in solid, satisfying fashion, and with the direction from Walter Hill, there's a visual polish to this movie that still enables it to look great today. Now, coming in at number 43 is a forgotten gem that I just love. It's a military-themed action thriller about America's designated hitters on terrorism. They are Navy SEALs from 1990, starring Charlie Sheen, Michael Biehn, Bill Paxton, and Dennis Haysbert from director Louis Teague. I won't argue this is a more military-themed action romp than it is a movie relying on realism, but that does not keep this film from taking the viewer on a thrilling ride of bravado and gritty action and superficial emotions. Navy SEALs is a film you watch with a certain suspension of disbelief. This isn't a biopic, it's a a full throttle action movie oozing with masculinity and melodrama, and it's fantastic. I think the cast overall is perfect for the needs of these roles. Charlie Sheen and Michael Biehn carry the pace more than effectively, and the supporting members with guys like Bill Paxton and Dennis Haysbert get their moments to shine individually as well. But really what makes this film stand out is that it's decently acted, the performances do elevate the writing, and it's able to easily engage interest between the barrages of missions and shootouts and just visually appealing stunt work, because Navy SEALs is a bit forgotten, but it holds up as one of the decade's best action movies. Coming up next at number 42 is an often forgotten real-time action thriller about a group of guys who go out for a night of boxing, but when they make the wrong turn, they find themselves in a fight for survival in 1993's Judgment Night, starring Emilio Estevez, Cuba Gooding Jr., Stephen Dorff, Jeremy Piven, and Dennis Leary. I think this is one of those real-time situational action thrillers that can naturally lure you into the many situations that are suspensefully delivered throughout the runtime. Estevez and Gooding Jr. are definitely driving the good guys, but really the ensemble cast overall is strong. That ensemble is what makes this movie what it is. And then on the villain side, this one delivers a truly menacing performance from Dennis Leary, who despite his scene chewing in this film is a great bad guy, but he also has great villain actor Peter Green in his corner to help stack the deck against our innocent friends who just wanted to go to a boxing match. But really where Judgment Night shines is in its pacing, its gritty direction, and just how the story overall navigates this rundown section of town. It's just a thrilling playground for our heroes to get tossed into, and it's a string of harrowing moments and bursts of action that rarely overplay their hand. This movie keeps it grounded and injects a phenomenal musical soundtrack, and the result is still awesome decades later. And my number 41 movie is a bona fide cult classic. Dolph Lundgren's a warrior, Brandon Lee's a wise guy. They're two LA cops going after Japan's most ruthless gangster in 1991's Showdown in Little Tokyo, directed by Mark L. Lester. Now, the flaws in Showdown in Little Tokyo are front and center. It's a bit shallow, it's predictable, and the overall buddy formula is routine. Yet, none of that gets in the way of this being a wildly fun and fast-paced action romp with both Lundgren and Lee knowing exactly what this movie wanted to be and then playing up to their roles perfectly to deliver that. I think the late Brandon Lee certainly steals the show from Lundgren. He's hilarious in this film with a strong comedic timing, and together, Lee and Lundgren are more than effective as a duo for the needs of this B action flick. It's filled with action from the shootouts to fight scenes to Lundgren jumping over cars and flipping them over with his bare hands. It's a riot of the action genre cliches, but it's amazing at the same time. Plus, Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa comes in to deliver a fantastic over-the-top villain, and then Tia Carrera comes in to serve as effective window dressing. So this movie provides more than enough to make it one of the decade's best in the genre without question. Coming in at number 40 is a classic action flick from the 90s. It centers on a cook aboard a battleship that's taken over by mercenaries, and for Steven Seagal, saving the day won't be a job, it'll be an adventure in 1992's Under Siege, also starring Gary Busey and Tommy Lee Jones. This was certainly Seagal's most well-received action flick, and I think rightfully so, as it takes the Die Hard formula and really works it to precision. As a former SEAL, Seagal is a bit more subdued in this role, but he still oozes tons of masculinity, and I think it's perfect for the needs of this tightly crafted plot. Under Siege, I think, blends gunplay and suspense and Seagal's trademark martial arts to give this film plenty of contained action. The use of the ship gives the movie a realistic vibe that I think really serves as the perfect playground for Seagal to save the day. But really, to me, where this movie shines is from the dual villains in Tommy Lee Jones and Gary Busey, who I think easily outshine Seagal. I think Busey is pleasantly sadistic and Tommy Lee Jones is world-class maniacal, and they are the stars of the film. You love to hate these guys, and that's what makes Steven Seagal taking them out so rewarding. We're jumping from one classic action flick to another for my 39 pick. This one starring Jean-Claude Van Damme as a drifter being hunted by killers and punching rattlesnakes in the face. It's the full-throttle action thriller from John Woo, 1993's Hard Target, also starring Lance Henriksen, Arnold Vosloo, and Yancey Butler. Now, Hard Target would give Jean-Claude Van Damme that high-profile director to work with in John Woo, and I think the result is an elegant dance of violent action and bravado and melodrama. The humans hunting humans for sport story has been done before, but I think in the hands of Woo and Van Damme, it's still a plenty delightful ride. The plot is simple, but it's effective, and the visual appeal of this movie, I think, still holds up today, as Woo just seemed to know how to frame Van Damme to capture the energy of his moves, from kicking glasses off a dude's face to diving while shooting. It's just magically cheesy. It's a buffet of all the insanity that we loved from the mid-90s action genre. Van Damme is really just soaking in the scenery, and Lance Henriksen and Arnold Vosloo are fantastic villains. Admittedly, Hard Target doesn't break many genre molds, but it's a crisply shot film filled with a blend of small and large-scale action that I think still holds up great today. Now, my number 38 flick may be a bit forgotten to some of you guys, but it's a nostalgic favorite of mine. It's a Die Hard-inspired thriller set at a boys' school that's taken over by terrorists, and these kids have no weapons, but they only have each other. And Toy Soldiers from 1991, starring Sean Astin, Will Wheaton, Louis Gossett Jr., and Keith Coogan. I will assume I have this film higher on the list than most would put it, and I will admit there is a strong built-in element of predictability to this movie, but it doesn't get in the way of Toy Soldiers being a thrilling Die Hard knockoff with a collection of lovable young characters you want to see succeed. Sean Astin and Will Wheaton anchor the young cast, and the iconic Louis Gossett Jr. cements the entire film as the mentor figure and the one who does believe that these kids can get the job done. I think this movie really keeps a quick pace. It's filled with close calls and suspense and bursts of practical action, but really where Toy Soldiers shines is really in the fact that it doesn't try to do too much. It keeps these kids in their own lane. The story crafts a clever game of cat and mouse, and the villains are just evil enough to feel intimidating, but not too much to where you couldn't imagine these kids outsmarting them. Moving along to number 37 is a film you could say was the first Die Hard knockoff, because when terrorists would take over Dulles International Airport on the verge of Christmas, John McClane would find himself once again in the wrong place at the wrong time, but this time he would have shoes in Die Hard 2, Die Harder from 1990. Easily the best Die Hard knockoff since the first Die Hard. Die Harder is like Home Alone 2. It just does everything that worked well in the first movie and amplifies it. And despite the predictability, the sequel is on its own a strong action movie. The airport is really the perfect playground for all the chaos, and the buffet of chase sequences and shootouts and fight scenes are plenty enough for this fast-moving real-time thriller. Now, admittedly, William Sadler is no Alan Rickman, but he gives the movie a menacing villain for McClane to battle with, and the result, I think, is still one of the best action romps from the decade. Die Hard 2 just has a charming genre atmosphere to it, and McClane feels even more at home in this role to really build on the character as he fights through just an army of bad guys. Plus, the practical action and the production design are fantastic in this movie. It gives the entire film a gritty realism that still holds up all these years later. Now, next up at 36 is a movie that certainly has more dramatic flair than it is for being a traditional action flick, but in 1994, the truth would need a soldier, and that man would be Harrison Ford, returning to the role of Jack Ryan in Clear and Present Danger from director Philip Noyce, also starring Willem Dafoe, Ann Archer, and Joaquin de Almeida. There is just something about Harrison Ford in the role of Jack Ryan that can lure me in, and maybe higher on my list than most would place it. I do think this is a fine action movie when the violence and the intensity does kick in. Clear and Present Danger has a methodical pace to it. It's not nearly as in your face as most traditional action movies were from the decade, but the strategic progression of this story, I think, is perfect for elevating intensity and emotion and intrigue. The story is like a game of chess. yes, with many moving pieces, but it is easy to follow, it's easy to invest in, and it results in the action hitting much harder when it does strike. Plus, I think the entire cast, from Harrison Ford through the supporting players like Willem Dafoe to even the smaller characters, are brought to life with realistic performances. This is another of those films that feels like it has history, it feels like it's lived in, and to this day, I think it's quality cinema. We're sticking with the theme of government and military for my 35 pick. It's a movie that takes a group of terrorists, an elite team of commandos, an analyst, and a flight attendant, and puts them all on an airliner together in the thrilling Executive Decision from 1996, starring Kurt Russell, Halle Berry, and a star-studded ensemble cast. I would say Executive Decision is a movie that gets a bit overlooked because it's a thrilling, high-altitude adventure that really delivers a lot of edgier seat suspense and tension and nail-biting action, and just a fantastic collection of performances led by Kurt Russell and Halle Berry. The plot is really able to keep you guessing, and the organization of the story layers creates a strong rewatch value. The mission itself is simple, but the ramifications couldn't be greater. This naturally just pulls you into the story. It will have you hanging on every move this small group of heroes makes to save the day. Executive Decision is often more known as the film that Steven Seagal dies at the beginning of, but Kurt Russell acts his ass off in this movie, much like Halle Berry does, and everybody overall really does give it all to give this film a collection of lived-in characters that only amplifies the intensity of the central mission that will have you hanging on every move. We're traveling through time for my number 34 pick. They killed his wife 10 years ago, and there's no time to save her until now in 1994's Time Cop, starring Jean-Claude Van Damme, Mia Sara, and Ron Silver, as well as Gloria Rubin from director Peter Hyams. You know, I don't think Time Cop gets the love that it should for being a well-crafted time travel action flick. Van Damme is strong in this role. He's able to bring the emotional layering, but also easily feels like the tough action lead when needed to give this lead an engaging duality. In the plot, I think, is unique, where many films in the genre were missing such items from this time. Time Cop really does keep a quick moving pace. It doesn't overdo the time travel aspect to get too convoluted, but most importantly, the story doesn't get in the way of what makes a Van Damme movie great, and that's being the action and seeing him kicking ass, which he gets ample opportunity to do so. I think the blend of practical action and solid digital effects for the time period are able to give this film a lasting visual appeal. Van Damme coming in and out of time still looks crisp, and the practical stunt work still holds up to give the entire film a timeless vibe that you can't help but appreciate. Coming up next at number 33 is a cyber action thriller starring two Oscar winners. The Only Privacy Left Is Inside Your Head, and Tony Scott's Enemy of the State from 1998, starring Will Smith and Gene Hackman. Now, I was a little torn when pondering to include Enemy of the State on this list. Admittedly, it's slightly more of an adventure flick, but I had to put it on here regardless because when the action does kick in, I think it's a perfect complement to the compelling plotline, and with Will Smith in the lead, you're effectively pulled right into the middle of the intensity just effortlessly as he fights to get his life back. The cyber thriller element of the story creates a strong and appealing atmosphere. Smith and Hackman together are a dynamite duo. Enemy of the State, I think, effectively keeps its foot on the gas, and the hurdles thrown at Smith's character seem insurmountable, which is what just makes this a riveting ride of cyber terror and close calls and practical action. It's not as flashy as Smith's other films, but it's one of his best and most well-rounded movies. Coming up next at number 32 is a film set in a world with no justice, where one man has been chosen to protect the innocent in 1994's The Crow, starring the late Brandon Lee, Michael Wincott, and Ernie Hudson from director Alex Proyas. Still, in my opinion, one of the best CBMs ever made. The Crow is a film that creates atmosphere about as good as one can. This story will immediately lure you into this dark and seedy world and will instantly connect you with the pain of the central character. As we all know, Brandon Lee would be tragically shot during the filming of this movie, and the performance that he brought to The Crow was leaps and bounds his best. Now, I won't argue that this is much more of a dark drama than it is a pure action movie, but when the action does hit, I think it's hyper-violence at its most elegant and its most meaningful because of that emotional investment that you have in this man seeking justice against those who commit evil. I think Michael Wincott is awesome in the shoes of the villain. Ernie Hudson leaves his impression as well. Few films are as gloomy and tragic both on and off the screen as The Crow, but regardless, it's a film that can command your attention no matter how many times you've seen it. And coming in at number 31 is a film that's as fun as it is cheesy. It stars Nicolas Cage as an unlucky convict aboard Con Air from 1997, also starring John Malkovich, John Cusack, Steve Buscemi, Ving Rhames, and many others from director Simon West. Nicolas Cage would deliver a trio of blockbuster action flicks from 96 to 97, and right in the middle was this wildly adventurous action bonanza that feels comically masculine like the movies from the 80s, but with all the cutting-edge spectacle the genre would be known for in the mid to late 90s. Con Air is a ridiculous ride of awesome action and bravado and special effects, and Cage and Malkovich fighting on the screen and competing who could just chew up the scenery the most. And the result, I think, is a humorous ride of well-directed genre excess. The ensemble cast really is impressive. I think everybody gets their moments, both large and small, to leave their impression. I think Cage is like a parody of the action star without actually being the parody of the action star, but it's surprisingly perfect for the tone of this roller coaster of melodramatic action. Con Air is certainly not without its flaws, but few films are better when it comes to sitting back for a movie with your friends to remember the nostalgia of 90s cinema. Closing out the 30s, at number 30 is a bit of a forgotten gem from 1991 that I think still delivers everything you want from an action flick. It centers on a cop accused of murder, and the only man who knows he's innocent is the killer who framed him, in Ricochet, starring Denzel Washington, John Lithgow, and Ice-T. I can assume most wouldn't have Ricochet as high up on their lists, but I absolutely love it, and I feel both Washington and Lithgow greatly elevate the material. This could have easily been an instantly forgettable action thriller from the early part of the decade, but with the heightened performances, the result is a just nostalgic ride of two fantastic actors going all in on their roles. Washington showed he had action range immediately in his career, and you can see that Lithgow is relishing in the role of the sadistic killer, but outside of that, I think Ricochet has all the pieces you need for a great action thriller. There's motivation for the hero, you can easily sense the capability of the villain, and the game of cat and mouse that they play is evenly paced and is filled with violence and practical action, and an ultra rewarding final showdown that was just everything we loved from action movies from the 80s, but wrapped here in a sleek early 90s package. Moving along to my number 29 pick is a big budget blockbuster action flick of the decade that was set in Alcatraz, where 5 million lives will depend on two men trying to break into The Rock, from director Michael Bay, starring Nicolas Cage and Sean Connery. Now, to me, The Rock is just the perfect recipe for a big blockbuster action flick. You get Nicolas Cage jumping into the action genre as the everyday hero. He's paired with the legend Sean Connery, so you get that dual generation of acting leads, and then you get the, at the time, cutting-edge direction from Michael Bay. This all translates to me into one of the iconic action flicks from the decade, and a movie that can still easily sweep you up all these years later. I think Cage and Connery are fantastic together as they grow into a team, and the mission, as melodramatic as it is, feels plenty intense and impactful with Ed Harris in control. This one's just filled with all the Bayisms, but it was still very much cool when The Rock was released, and the blend of action on display in this over-the-top adventure is everything that was awesome about the genre in the mid to late 90s. Now, coming in at number 28 is a classic remake of a classic martial arts flick. To avenge the death of his master, a man will fight like never before in the thrilling Fist of Legend from 1994, directed by Gordon Chan and starring martial arts legend Jet Li. Admittedly, pure martial arts action movies from the 90s could easily have their own list. I probably will make one soon, but this remake of the Bruce Lee classic is one of the first martial arts movies I owned, and I couldn't get enough of the speed of Jet Li. This one tells a familiar story, but the fight choreography on display is riveting. No matter how many times you've watched it, Jet Li is impressive in this film with his breakneck speed and the fluidity of his movements, and the result is just a buffet of feverish action that will have you on the edge of your seat. It's super hyper realistic and visually stunning to see the escalation of the action, and whether Lee is taking on one man or many men at once, he never feels out of control, and this controlled rage just elevates perfectly until it explodes in the fantastic final showdown. Now, my number 27 pick is another nostalgic favorite of mine. It follows twin brothers who avenge the murder of their parents. One packs a punch, the other packs a piece, and together they will deliver when Jean-Claude Van Damme would star next to Jean-Claude Van Damme in 1991's Double Impact, directed by Sheldon Lettich. Double the Van Damme really was double the fun in this nostalgic 90s action romp. It's a simple story, brothers out for revenge, but the international locations, the practical action, Bolo Young as the villain, and Van Damme doing a great job playing brothers makes this ridiculous movie magically ridiculous. You get the smooth, preppy-ish Van Damme, and then the slicked hair, cigar-smoking Van Damme, and you have to give him credit for bringing some range to this set of brothers to sell it just a little bit. But I mean, outside of that, Double Impact just knows what it was. It keeps a quick pace, the killing is frequent, there's a capability in the gunplay, and the fight scenes are well staged, which makes the movie a blast. Van Damme is very young here, but already showed he had the charisma to be a leading man, and that's what he would go on to do after this movie. But Double Impact will always be, to me, one of his best. My number 26 movie would be the kickoff of a franchise that is still going relatively strong today, and that would be the Brian De Palma classic 1996's Mission Impossible, starring Tom Cruise, Emmanuel Bert, Ving Rhames, Jean Reno, and Jon Voight. It's pretty surprising to say the Mission Impossible franchise is still going strong all these years later, and most of the entries after this first one were much flashier and much more intricate from an action standpoint. But as a film from the 90s, this first Impossible mission, led by Tom Cruise, I think still holds up as a sound action adventure lined with plenty of mystery and a nicely layered plot. The performances, I think, are fantastic, led by Cruise, but the twists and turns this story takes, the variety of the action and how it impacts the story, as well as Cruise as Ethan Hunt, just gives this movie a timeless appeal. The direction from De Palma gives the film an ominous atmosphere that I think complements the story extremely well, but it's his staging of the action, from the elaborate set pieces to the chase sequences and even the quieter moments, that I think make this movie so good. And despite being a bit too digitally reliant in the finale, it's still a satisfying closing. And at number 25 is a mildly forgotten film with a fantastic cast about a group of people brought together to complete a job, but how can you do that when everyone is an enemy for a price? In John Frankenheimer's 1998 classic Ronin, starring Robert De Niro, Sean Bean, Jean Reno, and many others. I would say the most awesome qualities of Ronin are those that lie in this film's subtleties, because Ronin is certainly an unassuming film for an action flick. It's methodical, it's certainly story driven as well, and there isn't a ton of violent action, but when it does splash on the screen, it's memorable and I think suspenseful. Ronin, I think, also delivers an ensemble of great performances. De Niro is cool and calculating in the lead, but it is an ensemble effort with really everybody playing their part in the outcome. But none of this, I think, is what makes Ronin one of the best action films of the decade. That would be just the result of all the impressive car chase sequences that are littered throughout this film. Good, old-fashioned chase sequences fueled by precision driving, top-notch stunt work, and immaculate direction that just pulls you into the speed of the sequences like few films in this genre can. Next up at number 24 is a thrilling action flick from Rennie Harlin about a secret agent with amnesia who finds her past coming back to haunt her, and that film would of course be 1996's The Long Kiss Goodnight, starring Gina Davis and Samuel L. Jackson. What I really love about The Long Kiss Goodnight is how it's able to craft a unique story inside the assassin genre that's been done so many times. The plot progression is smooth and always forward moving, and it's layered just enough to keep the engagement up. Plus, it's led by a killer performance from Gina Davis and from Samuel L. Jackson. I think they have a strong chemistry together. I think it makes the story easily engaging. And of course, when the action kicks in, the suspense elevates with ease. I think Rennie Harlin's direction is very sleek, and the action and violence in this movie, I think, really fits inside the tone of the film perfectly. And A Long Kiss Goodnight may not be as flashy as other assassin flicks, but it's well crafted from the writing to the action to the performances to the direction, and I think that's what gives this movie a timeless appeal. We're jumping back a year to 1995 for my number 23 movie, a larger budget sequel to a small indie movie we've already covered on this list. It follows a man who came back to settle the score with someone, anyone, and everyone in Robert Rodriguez's Desperado, starring Antonio Banderas and Salma Hayek. Antonio Banderas would burst onto the Hollywood action scene with Desperado, a ballet of bullets south of the border that delivered a stylistic violence most audiences had never seen before. It's hyper-realistic in most places, but it's also very gritty and grounded during others, and it all translated into an action film with just a completely unique atmosphere and vibe. There's just relentless gunfire in this modern Western, and the elegance and all the carnage brought to the screen from Rodriguez is nothing short of commendable. I think Banderas is just soaking in the scenery in this movie and just commanding the screen with ease. Salma Hayek is world-class gorgeous, and sure, the mission of revenge at the core is a been there, done that saga, but it's also a tried and true formula that, when used correctly, can result in a timeless action romp, and that's exactly what Desperado is. We've already talked about one martial arts legend in this list, and this next film at number 22 stars another when Jackie Chan would take on a street gang in 1995's Rumble in the Bronx, directed by Stanley Tong, also starring a ton of guys who get their asses kicked. The unofficial introduction of Jackie Chan to Western audiences, Rumble in the Bronx, when it was released, was just like a breath of fresh air in the action genre. Chan was doing his own stunts and delivering action to the screen we hadn't seen with Stallone and Arnold or Van Damme or Seagal, and I think the result is a just visual polish to the action choreography that still makes it look just as amazing today as it did back then. The story in this one is admittedly surface level thin, but the charisma and the stunt work from Chan is never limited as you take the ride of this mission with him, from I think stunning action set pieces and chase sequence to just dazzling martial arts choreography. This movie delivered a bit of it all in the action department, and while it may get a tad silly in spots, Rumble in the Bronx is still considered a game changer in the genre of action. And coming in at number 21 is a movie not everybody may have as high on their list as I do. The McManus brothers are not angels. They were just sent from heaven to make life hell for all sinners in 1999's The Boondock Saints, starring Norman Reedus, Sean Patrick Flannery, and Willem Dafoe. Now, I think the blend of drama and action crafted in The Boondock Saints is near seamless as this pair of brothers gets a mission from God. Admittedly, it's more of an out-of-the-box drama, but when the violence kicks in and the action does as well, it's unrelenting as it can get in the genre. There's a slightly methodical pace to this film that I just enjoy. I think it really gives the characters time to breathe and grow. It gives the dynamic between Dafoe's character time to seat itself and grow as well. And just overall, I would say the atmosphere and the vibe that this movie delivers is just really an instant escape into the Boston underworld. The Boondock Saints is a very raw film. The performances are not perfect, but that's actually kind of just perfect for the needs of this story. And when the bullets are flying, which is frequent, you can't help but be all up in your seat in the middle of this emotionally fueled carnage. Coming in at number 20 is a movie that delivered the 21st century's most dangerous cop and the 21st century's most ruthless criminal, and those men would be Sylvester Stallone and Wesley Snipes in 1993's Demolition Man, also starring Sandra Bullock from director Marco Brambilla. Now, some people may think Demolition Man is a bit too high on this list, but at the same time, the pairing of Stallone and Snipes was blockbuster cinema at its finest. Stallone just ate this role up and chewed the scenery perfect as an 80s action hero pulled into the future, but really, Wesley Snipes was the star of the show as the maniacal Simon Phoenix. I think Snipes was just all in on this performance. It's completely over the top, but in the hands of Snipes, there's just a legitimacy to it that provided this film with a world-class villain, and an action movie is often only as good as its villain is. But outside of the lead performances, there's a great ensemble cast led by Sandra Bullock, and the world building of the future is totally nostalgic. Demolition Man is absolutely filled with all the genre cliches you know and love, but I don't think it keeps this movie from being inventive and unique and ambitious. From the production design to the wardrobes to the stunt work, this film and the action are impressive. Demolition Man was just a fabric of pop culture in the 90s, and it's still one of the decade's best. My number 19 film would take two of sitcom's biggest stars, and after 2 hours would turn them into viable action stars when Will Smith and Martin Lawrence would star in Bad Boys from director Michael Bay. In 1995, Michael Bay would move from directing music videos to blockbuster action movies, and his first film would go on to ignite a franchise that is still going strong to this day. Bad Boys would pair two sitcom stars, and the result is one of the best action comedies of all time. Bad Boys, first and foremost, with its just striking score and Bay's thematic direction, is able to build an inviting atmosphere of Miami and endless South Beach style. Then you get Will Smith and Martin Lawrence, who I think go together like peanut butter and jelly, and the result is a film that could easily be considered the lethal weapon of the 90s. The humor is effortless, the adventurous plot, as traditional as it is, does feel unique, and the pace is swift to easily sweep you up on the case with Lowry and Burnett. I think the practical action is awesome across the board, from small to large-scale gunfights, fistfights, chase sequences, and a thrilling edge-of-your-seat finale that just exploded with adrenaline and still holds a place as one of the best action movie closings ever. In order to catch him, he must become him. That was the tagline for my number 18 movie, a big budget blockbuster that would take John Woo, John Travolta, and Nicolas Cage and stuff their endless personalities into one wild movie, and that movie would be 1997's Face Off. Now, Face Off is a film that sounds completely absurd on paper, and its premise was one that took years to finally get into production, but with John Woo directing and two iconically over-the-top actors in John Travolta and Nicolas Cage in the lead, what you get is a delightfully ridiculous, just action bonanza that's as cheesy as it is amazing. Travolta and Cage are also, I think, perfectly cast as the hero and villain who switch faces to battle with one another for 2 hours. And with Woo directing, you get enough stunt work and practical action and explosive theatrics for like two blockbuster action flicks. I think popcorn cinema is Face Off, and in the summer of 95, this movie was everywhere and people just loved the silliness of it, something that I don't think could have ever been had Travolta and Cage not gone all in on these roles. They are just soaking up the scenery, both have their personalities dialed up to the max, and it's just perfect for the tone of this self-indulgent action film that delivers a bit of it all and then some, with a side of white doves. Now, my number 17 movie may be one that's surprisingly high on this list to some people, but it's an action thriller that delivered an avalanche of thrills and practical visuals that still hold up today, and that film would be 1993's Cliffhanger, starring Sylvester Stallone, Michael Rooker, and John Lithgow from director Renny Harlin. I can see how some may not put this film as high up on their list as I have it, but I think you have to appreciate the blend of practical stunt work and just the great direction from Rennie Harlan. I think Cliffhanger has a timeless visual appeal to it because of all the mountain locations that were used for shooting, where I think green screens would more than likely be used today. I think it's certainly a basic plot, but the unique elements slapped onto it make this film a thrilling ride. I think Stallone has all the needed energy for the lead role. Lithgow, sure, he's a bit much in places, but he's still a great villain with plenty of sadistic gusto and a charming team of henchmen. And then you get Michael Rooker, who comes in to serve as a solid number two on the good guy side. But really, overall, Cliffhanger, in my opinion, is great because it doesn't overdo it. The action is thrilling because you can see it all happening. Nothing is over edited. The cinematography is fantastic and the pace is consistent. You get Stallone on the run, taking out bad guys and just running and jumping and diving all over these rugged mountains. And it's still a wildly entertaining ride all these years later. In 1999, a new international action star would hit Hollywood with my number 16 pick. When people needed to disappear, they come see Meg. When people need to be killed, they never see Chow Yun-fat coming in The Replacement Killers, also starring Mira Sorvino from director Antoine Fuqua. Chow Yun-fat would burst onto the Hollywood scene with The Replacement Killers, a very sleek and gritty action film that just thrives on the direction from Antoine Fuqua and the chemistry between Chow and Mira Sorvino. It's a traditional plot progression as an assassin has a change of heart on the job and ends up being hunted himself, but there's just a style and an edginess to this movie that creates an atmosphere that just has a charming vibe of alluring danger to it. The house music gives the film energy when needed, and it elevates the action extremely well, which is where I think this movie really shines. The Replacement Killer is filled with badass dudes, violent gunplay, and chase sequences as everybody makes their play on Chow's character. I think it gives the film a very tight pace with a blend of storytelling and character development and hyper-violent action that you don't often get in the genre. And when the bullets are flying and Chow has his pistols in hand, The Replacement Killers, in my opinion, is top-notch in the genre. Moving along to my number 15 movie is another childhood favorite of mine. It stars Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren as the ultimate weapons of the future who have just declared war on each other in 1992's Universal Soldier, directed by Roland Emmerich. Now, Universal Soldier is definitely another of those action romps that feels completely like a product of the 80s. I mean, soldiers being brought back to life as super soldiers is absurdly awesome as a premise for an action flick with a strong sci-fi theme. And then you get Van Damme early in his prime and Dolph Lundgren once again providing a film a top-tier villain. And what you get is a delightfully violent adventure filled with plenty of gunplay and chase sequences and violent killing and all the trademark Van Damme moves we know and love. And sure, Universal Soldier is a blend of borrowed and new, but I definitely think the new outshines the familiar progression, the predictable ending, and the relatively by-the-numbers middle act. I think Van Damme is undeniably great in this role, but I think much like Demolition Man with Wesley Snipes, Lundgren here is easily able to steal the show as a wild Unisol gone rogue. He's taking people out, dropping great lines, collecting ears on a necklace, and it's hilariously satisfying. Plus, when the adventure comes to a head in the final showdown between Van Damme and Lundgren out in the rain, it does not disappoint as both get their blows in before Van Damme gets the last laugh in true genre fashion. Coming up next at number 14 is a film filled with incredible action sequences and the smoothest special agent in history when Pierce Brosnan starred as James Bond in 1997's Tomorrow Never Dies alongside Michelle Yeoh, Terry Hatcher, and Jonathan Pryce. The Bond films have always been known for large-scale action set pieces and endless international adventures, and Brosnan's second outing in the role with Tomorrow Never Dies was definitely no different. But to me, where it veers joyfully into the department of pure action and martial arts is with the addition of Michelle Yeoh. I think just what she brings to the action department with her physicality and martial arts prowess is just able to elevate a great adventure film into one of the decade's best pure action movies. movies. I think Yo and Brosnan are a perfect pair for this plot. Both are able to leave their impact, and Tomorrow Never Dies is a movie that can just instantly lure you in with its imaginative plot and its quick pace. It's a very sexy film. It's a compelling film, and the style is endless, which I think pairs perfectly with the ambitious action set pieces that brought tension-filled action to the screen that we had never seen before, while still being able to hover effortlessly within the playground of being a James Bond film. Coming up next at number 13 is a Chinese martial arts movie not everybody may be familiar with, but it's a flick that's filled with dazzling action and stunt work as Jackie Chan and Michelle Yeoh would team up to stop a drug lord in 1992's Super Cop from director Stanley Tong. I think few films deliver the intricate level of fight choreography that Super Cop is able to deliver with Jackie Chan and Michelle Yeoh, but I mean, Super Cop is much more than a traditional martial arts movie. You got Chan running on top of moving trains and dangling from ladders hanging from helicopters that are moving across the city, and Yeoh is doing handstands on moving vehicles and diving onto the hoods of cars and so much more, which just, I think, results in this film being one of the best pure action films from the decade, while also being one of the best martial arts films as well. Now, admittedly, the plot of this one and the plot progression from a storytelling aspect is thin, and it's relatively familiar along its pace, but it's more than enough to connect just the buffet of awe-inspiring action sequences that this movie is able to deliver within its tight 90-minute runtime. It has strong spots of humor. Chan and Yeoh really work extremely well off one another. Both are just all in on these roles and the physicality needed, and they knock it out of the park with a film that still looks just as impressive and can have you on the edge of your seat all these years later. Moving from Jackie Chan to Arnold Schwarzenegger for my number 12 movie, a wild sci-fi action thriller. How would you know if someone stole your mind? In 1990's Total Recall, directed by Paul Verhoeven, also starring Rachel Ticotin, Sharon Stone, Michael Ironside, and Ronnie Cox. Now, Arnold Schwarzenegger, throughout his A-list run, was really able to pull the action genre into science fiction effortlessly, and outside of the Terminator, Total Recall would easily be his best sci-fi themed action blockbuster, because I think the film still holds up impressively all these years later, and the blend of just awesome makeup work and wardrobe design and practical effects and production design with the digital effects, I think that still look pretty good today. It's just a fantastic film to sit back and watch. Arnold commanded this movie as Quaid, and the variety of action is just all nestled seamlessly into this inventive plot. I think Verhoeven's direction, complemented by just some stunning cinematography, give Total Recall a crisp, lasting visual appeal. And I think the fast-moving story really is a true cinematic adventure with great world building, but Arnold still gets his action genre trademarks in. He's taking dudes out, he's dropping one-liners, and just oozing masculinity from start to finish. Plus, this one also delivers excellent performances from both Ronnie Cox and Michael Ironside, so there is no shortage of eccentric bad guys. I think Total Recall could be classed as more of a sci-fi adventure, but with Arnold in the lead, the action genre tropes in this film are undeniable. And for my number 11 movie, we're diving into the dark side of football. It centers on two guys who everybody had counted out, but they're about to get back in the game, and the Tony Scott thriller, The Last Boy Scout from 1991, starring Bruce Willis, Damon Wayans, and Noble Willingham. I certainly think The Last Boy Scout is one of those movies that can sneak up on you and have you completely locked in instantly. Tony Scott gives this film so much atmosphere. It's glitzy and elegant at times, but also bleak and very grim, with two absolutely broken characters in the lead with Willis and Wayans, as well as a unique plot that fits nicely inside the genre, which results in a timeless classic. I think Willis is essentially John McClane in this film, but much further down the rabbit hole of darkness, and he just kills it with this performance. Wayans, as well as a nice blend of humor and seriousness, and their abrasive chemistry really is perfect for the needs of this role. You can see these guys clearly dislike one another, but at the end you can feel their friendship, and it's a great ride of just violent action and character despair and the world of professional football and gambling, complete with sadistic villains you can't wait to see get their dues. And overall, The Last Boy Scout to me is an extremely well-crafted action film on nearly every level that rides at full speed from start to finish. Coming in at number 10 is a movie about a cop who can be great on a good day, and on a bad day, he is the best there is because he is Bruce Willis. Bruce Willis is John McClane, and the film would be 1995's Die Hard with a Vengeance from director John McTiernan, also starring Samuel L. Jackson and Jeremy Irons. Now, after Die Hard 2 basically remade the first Die Hard, Die Hard with a Vengeance was able to come in and just take the franchise to completely new avenues while still maintaining the same tone and vibe that I think made the first film so iconic and timeless, sort of Lethal Weapon inspired, with Willis's pairing with Samuel L. Jackson and the elevation of the buddy comedy themes. It actually works for the needs of this creative plotline that has plenty of spectacle but still feels relatively grounded and realistic. Willis and Jackson, I think, working together to solve clues is a great time, and it's because the contained elements of the franchise are completely removed. I mean, unlike the confines of Nakatomi Plaza or an airport, the entire city of New York is the new playground, and it allowed the film to incorporate so much more into the action. You get all the shootouts and fight sequences with McClane doing his thing, but Die Hard with a Vengeance was also able to deliver impressive action set pieces like the taxi chase through Central Park, the chase sequence on the highway, and even when things get a little bit too over the top in the flooded tunnel, this is still the best film in the franchise after the first film. I have a comic book action movie for my number 9 film about a man with the power of an immortal and the soul of a human and the heart of a hero, and the movie is, of course, 1998's Blade, starring Wesley Snipes, Chris Christopherson, and Boucher Wright, Stephen Dorff, from director Stephen Norrington. I certainly think Blade gets a bit overlooked when it comes to CBMs that would go on to reinvigorate the genre, and sure, this Daywalker isn't on the same level as Spider-Man or X-Men, but this film is still one of the best comic book movies of all time, and this role would go on to be iconic for Wesley Snipes, who just lived and breathed this character perfectly for the needs of the plot and just the tone overall. I think Norrington's direction is edgy and gritty, but still very sleek and just endlessly stylish. He's able to create a delightfully ominous atmosphere that just runs throughout the duration of this film. The soundtrack is pulse pounding and able to elevate the mood and vibe of any given scene with ease, and Stephen Dorff is just soaking in the villain vibes with gusto to feel like a suitable matchup for Snipes. And when the action kicks in and Blade is taking out vampires, the result is a timeless ride of carnage and mayhem and martial arts violence. It's absolutely raining gunfire for my number 8 pick, a full-throttle Hong Kong action flick from the visionary director John Woo. It stars Chow Yun-fat as a cop who has brains, brawn, and an instinct to kill, and 1992's Hard Boiled, also starring Tony Leung, Philip Chan, and Teresa Mo. Now, I will admit that Hard Boiled does follow a genre checklist of cliches from an action standpoint, as well as from an action storytelling standpoint, but surprisingly, in the hands of John Woo behind the camera and from the straight-edged performances led by Chow Yun-fat that give the impression this is the first time this story has been told, just makes this bonanza of bullets a joyful ride of carnage and cop-themed suspense. This film goes from grounded to a bit ridiculous, but is consistently played straight, and the elegance in the waves of violence is just a sight to behold. The body count in this film is endless in this 2-hour mission to take down a mobster and his crew, and it delivers everything from confined gunplay to large-scale battle sequences with machine guns and pistols and a variety of other weapons and pyrotechnics. I mean, John Woo indulges in the spectacle with Hard Boiled, and Chow would bring his usual dual pistols to the forefront in this film that not all of you may be aware of, but it's one that has certainly inspired probably many of your favorites in the genre recently. Now, my number 7 pick would deliver a showdown that Los Angeles has never seen before, and the result would be one of my all-time favorite films, and it's 1995's Heat from director Michael Mann, starring Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Val Kilmer, Tom Sizemore, and many others to complete a world-class ensemble. Now, Heat is without question one of my all-time favorite films. I think it's one of the best crime dramas of all time and would easily top many of my all-time lists. However, as an action movie, when the violence does ignite in Heat, Michael Mann's classic is also one of the best action movies from the decade. This LA set saga doesn't deliver a ton of action. It's character and story driven, which is really what you want from a crime drama centered on a team of high-end thieves playing a game of cat and mouse with a relentless detective. Yet when the action does burst onto the screen, the direction from Mann, the choreography of the sequences, and just the visceral tone is impressive. The downtown shootout is legendary in the genre, and seeing De Niro and Pacino sharing the screen and having their final showdown is what makes cinema amazing. The ensemble cast in Heat is top tier as well. Everybody gets their moments to shine, and overall, I think Heat is precision filmmaking at its finest. Coming up next at number 6 is an action thriller that promised to deliver 100% pure adrenaline, and that was the result when Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze would team up for 1991's Point Break from director Kathryn Bigelow, also starring Lori Petty and the great, insanely great Gary Busey. Point Break is just another film that I have a lifelong love for. I think it's a perfect hybrid of 80s and 90s action, and the direction from Kathryn Bigelow is flawless. She creates just an alluring atmosphere that reeks of West Coast summer, endless sex appeal, adrenaline, and just living life with no rules, and it's just really classic action filmmaking. I think Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze are perfectly cast in their roles. Both breathe life into these characters to make them very much their own. Swayze, I mean, the guy would go on to be legendary as Bodhi, and the plot of surfers supplying their summer by wearing the masks of dead presidents and robbing banks is just fantastic story plotting. I think Point Break is summer at the cinema. It's peak summer in vibes, and the endless string of action gives this film just an inescapable pace. It's from the foot chases to the car sequences, all the surfing, the skydiving, football on the beach, showdowns at the airports, fights in the sand, robbing banks, and raiding stash houses. Point Break never takes its foot off the gas. There's a seductive appeal to Point Break, and why even 30 years from now, I think this film will still be effortlessly cool. We have reached the top 5, and my number 5 movie is one that would be the theme of one of the best first-person shooter video games in history. It would also be the introduction of a completely new James Bond when Pierce would star in 1995's GoldenEye from director Martin Campbell, also starring Sean Bean, Isabel Scorupco, and Famke Janssen. Martin Campbell and Pierce Brosnan would definitely pump life back into the James Bond franchise with 95's GoldenEye, and to this day, I think it's still one of the best Bond films ever made and easily the most well-crafted entry in the Brosnan era. I think GoldenEye is a perfect blend of intricate storytelling, impactful plotting, and just enough character development to give the film a playful seriousness that connects all the equally intricate and inventive action sequences together perfectly. I think Brosnan was effortlessly suave in the role of Bond, and seeing him doing a lot of his own stunts just gave the action much more of an immersive atmosphere and visual appeal. This was really a reinvigoration for the franchise, and I think Sean Bean as 006 is just a great first villain for this new Bond, who's diving off dams and outsmarting henchmen and making love and getting his gun off and riding bikes off cliffs, flying planes and dangling from planes and just racing tanks in the street throughout a just calculating adventure with a great cast and a timeless appeal to the adventure. My number 4 movie is one of the biggest summer blockbusters of the 90s that starred one of the biggest action stars from the 80s and the 90s. It's Arnold Schwarzenegger's True Lies from 1994, directed by James Cameron, also starring Jamie Lee Curtis, Tia Carrere, and Tom Arnold. Arnold Schwarzenegger would team up again with James Cameron and enter the world of spies and espionage for a film that is just filled with visually stunning action sequences as Arnold lives a double life trying to save the world from terrorist threats while also trying to be a suburban husband, and the result is a buffet of adventure and humor and action and suspense, the perfect recipe for a film that would go on to co-command the summer box office in '94. The plot is engaging and not over-layered, and the comedic bits, I think, just fit perfectly with the flow of the film. Jamie Lee Curtis is equally as awesome as Arnold in this film, as she gets duped by a used car salesman, played up to amazing levels by the late great Bill Paxton. I think Tom Arnold serves as precision comedic relief. He pairs surprisingly well with Arnold, and sure, I will admit the villains are a bit too cartoonish, but it's nothing that hinders seeing Arnold riding horses in hotels and shooting up bathrooms and blowing up compounds and flying a fighter jet from making True Lies one of the decade's best action flicks. And with that one in the books, we have reached my top 3 films, the top 3 action movies of the 90s. And for my number 3 pick, action will hit Rush Hour and the non-stop blockbuster Speed from 1994, directed by Jan de Bont, starring Keanu Reeves, Sandra Bullock, Dennis Hopper, Jeff Daniels, and an incredible ensemble cast. I have no doubt I put this film higher up on the list than most would probably place it on theirs, but Speed was a massive blockbuster hit in the summer of '94, and I do think it gets overlooked when thinking back to 90s action films that relied mostly on practical action and on-location shoots. Speed is just a full-throttle action film from start to finish, and it's a riveting, edge-of-your-seat story filled with thrills and close calls all over Los Angeles as Reeves' Jack Traven and Sandra Bullock's Annie race this bus rigged with bombs from the freeways to the side streets to the runways with just top-tier, endless gusto. I think Reeves is perfect in the lead here, and both he and Bullock are extremely likable. They have a great chemistry together. It all just complements the nonstop ride of action adventure that this film takes you on. I think de Bont's direction is impressive. As I said, I think what he did in this film gets overlooked because this movie still looks great all these years later, from the endless and intricate chase sequences down to the quieter moments to the shootouts to the development of the world-class villain from Dennis Hopper. I think Speed is precision-crafted bonanza of summer movie spectacle and should be regarded as one of the decade's very best. Now, my number 2 pick is a sequel to an 80s classic. It's the same make, the same model, but this mission is different in the cinematic masterpiece that is 1991's Terminator 2, directed by James Cameron, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton, Edward Furlong, and Robert Patrick. Only a select few sequels have been able to go a completely different direction from the first film like Terminator 2 Judgment Day was able to accomplish. T2 is bigger, bolder, and more spectacle-filled on nearly every level than the Terminator, but both are equally impressive, but for completely different reasons. I mean, Arnold turns good in this entry, and his mission to save John and Sarah Connor just took the world by storm in the summer of 1991. James Cameron's direction was top-notch, and his roller coaster of chase sequences and explosions and shootout and cutting-edge special effects blended with good old stunt work just crafted a film that I think will stand the test of time. The continued world building is right in place to take things both forward and backwards, and it makes the mission of these characters absolutely compelling as you just get to love Arnold and his dispensing of one-liners. T2 is without question a film that I think changed the game for filmmaking, not only in the genre of action, but for cinematic storytelling as a whole, because the emotional intrigue in this movie is able to actually surpass the spectacle of the action to just make it all mean something. And for my number 1 pick, my selection for the best action movie from the 90s is a film that changed the game in terms of cinematic action. It was a film that challenged you to free your mind, and that film would be 1999's The Matrix from the Wachowskis, starring Keanu Reeves, Lawrence Fishburne, Carrie-Anne Moss, and Hugo Weaving. I easily had this as my number 1 film. I think The Matrix was able to just up the bar for the genre right at the perfect time before we went into the next century of cinema. From a storytelling aspect, they don't get much more unique, inventive, or just thought-provoking overall than The Matrix. And then from a pure action aspect, the visceral gunplay and shootouts and the smoothly choreographed fight sequences don't get much better than edgier seat intensity than that. I think The Matrix is just an iconic film filled with iconic characters and iconic moments. The ensemble cast is just a world-class grouping, and the Wachowskis took action filmmaking to new heights with new film techniques and cutting-edge technology that just created visual action storytelling the world had never seen on the big screen. I think Reeves would go on to just, as we know, be legendary in the role of Neo. Carrie-Anne Moss pumped life into Trinity, and Morpheus in the hands of Fishburne was the perfect just Obi-Wan for this world operating inside the world we're living in. And no matter how many times you've seen The Matrix, if you come across it, you'll end up taking the ride all over again before you even know it.
This is Jack Burton in the Pork Chop Express, and I'm talking to whoever's listening out there.
Survive a war, you gotta become war.
I suppose we have to register you as a lethal weapon.
You trying to say Jesus Christ can't hit a curveball?